but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, it is midday and you are with the Live Desk here on GB News. Coming up this Monday lunchtime.
Are the Tories in tax turmoil? Jeremy Hunt rejecting calls for big cuts and also questions Suella Braverman's language over migration. We'll have his speech live from the party conference in Manchester.
Junior doctors join consultants to launch their longest combined strike yet. A 3-day walkout in their long-running dispute over pay. What will break the deadlock?
And taking another ducking from the water companies. They now want to raise our bills by another £156 a year. But campaigners ask, what have they done with the billions they've already taken from us?
We'll also take our hats off to Europe's Ryder Cup victorious. But just why has golf become such a bogey sport? But first, let's tee off with the news headlines from Ray.
Thanks, Pip. Mark, good afternoon. Our top stories this hour. In breaking news, GB News can reveal that more than 25,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel so far this year. Around 350 migrants in up to 8 boats were intercepted by Border Force vessels and brought ashore to Dover Harbour this morning. On Saturday, 537 people crossed in 9 small boats. That's according to official figures released by the Home Office. Efforts to reduce carbon emissions won't come at the expense of bill payers. That's according to Energy Secretary. Speaking at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester a short time ago, Claire Coutinho said protest groups such as Just Stop Oil are out of touch with taxpayers.
It is these zealots that would see the cause of climate change lost. They are more concerned with signalling their own purity than with energising the cause of climate change. They don't seek to persuade, only to disrupt. They don't want to engage, only to silence. Conference, that is the Labour Party for you.
Well, as we've been hearing, the Chancellor has told GB News that no substantial tax cuts are possible this year. Speaking at the party conference, Jeremy Hunt ruled out any reductions in income or inheritance tax. He blamed an increase in the government's debt interest payments and said his priority is to bring inflation right down.
Well, I'm saying that no tax cuts are possible in a substantial way at the moment. So it's not just inheritance tax, it's income tax, it's all the different taxes that people look at. If we start having big tax cuts, it would be inflationary. And when we've got inflation at 6.7%, it's come down a lot, but it needs to come down a lot more. And the fastest way we can give help to families who are finding life really tough is to get inflation right down. And that's the priority of me and the Prime Minister.
Well, the Chancellor's announcement comes ahead of his conference speech this afternoon, in which he'll announce tougher rules on benefits. Jeremy Hunt says he'll make it harder for people to claim welfare while they refuse to take active steps to move into work. Meanwhile, as part of plans to get more people employed, he'll also announce a boost to the national living wage, which will go up to at least £11 an hour from April. Well, former Prime Minister Liz Truss will call for tax cuts in her speech at the party conference later today. Speaking at a fringe rally, she'll urge the Tory leadership to become the party of business again by slashing corporation tax. Ms Truss will also call for fracking and increased measures to boost house building. Her comments are expected to put pressure on Rishi Sunak from the Tory right. John McTernan is the former advisor to Tony Blair. He says voters are sick of Tory infighting.
Truth is, they're fighting each other at this conference. Liz Truss isn't making a speech, she's auditioning to rerun as party leader. They had 13 years, and look where we are. That's what the voters will be looking at. They'll be going, you had your time is over. Can you please call the next election as quickly as possible so we can actually have the change?
Junior doctors and consultants in England have started a 3-day walkout. That's the longest ever period of joint strike action. Until Thursday at 7 a.m, they'll deliver what's been described as Christmas Day levels of staffing. Their last joint strike in September led to almost 130,000 appointments being rescheduled. The government says the walkout is doing a massive disservice to patients. These doctors told us why they've walked.
Until and unless there is a credible pay offer, it will mean that doctors of all grades, but especially senior doctors, will continue to leave the country for other places, and the NHS will continue to suffer.
We are not planning for the future. There is going to be no staffing in the NHS. There's going to be no NHS in the future if we don't fight for our pay. But this isn't really necessarily a fight about individual consultant pay per se. We're actually fighting for the very future of the NHS.
And finally, water companies want to increase household bills by £156 a year by 2030. It's part of plans to fund upgrades and prevent 140,000 annual sewage spills. Industry regulator Ofwat says they will forensically scrutinise the scheme to ensure that the price hike is justified. It's expected to face a backlash from consumers struggling with the cost of living. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now let's get back to Mark and Pip.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. So it seems it's going to prove, a taxing time for the Tories at their party conference in Manchester. Jeremy Hunt resisting calls for big tax cuts. More than 30 MPs threatening not to vote through his autumn statement if there's any hint of tax increases.
The former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, will be giving a speech on the fringe of the conference to call for lower taxes, including what she said should be a slashing of corporation tax. She's being supported by Jacob Rees-Mogg and Priti Patel. So, what is the rest of the party making of the divisions and the deepening debate at the heart of policy? Well, to shed a little bit of light on this, hopefully, Gloria Di Piero is with Energy Minister Andrew Bowie. Good afternoon, Gloria.
Good to see you, Pip, and Mark too. Andrew Bowie, you are the Energy Minister. Yeah. Your Secretary of State, your boss, has just been speaking to conference. Now, obviously, you need to turn around that poll lead. You've got some goodies for voters too. She said this to the conference hall, that your department would insulate thousands of social homes. Yeah. I want to know how many. I want to know who's going to benefit. I want to know when it's going to happen. How do you know if you're going to be one of these beneficiaries?
Well, there's going to be a lot more detail coming out in due course, obviously, Gloria, but we've worked out that 10,000 homes across the United Kingdom will benefit from the announcements being made today, of which we'll be adding more detail in the coming weeks. We'll be starting the work immediately to ensure that these social homes get the support they need to insulate their homes so we can drive forward and ensure that nobody's in a home without the insulation that is required in the 21st century. That will help them keep their homes warm and also help us reach our taxing net zero targets.
Liz Truss, as we heard from my colleagues in the studio, she'll be speaking shortly on the fringes. Of course, she's not in the government anymore. She's going to be calling on Rishi Sunak to revive Conservative values. Are you pleased to see Liz Truss back and speaking with her voice at this conference?
Look, this is a Conservative Party. Unlike some other political parties in this country, we actually value and enjoy debate and putting points of policy forward so we can discuss them and choose what's the best way to move forward. Liz Truss is a Conservative MP, just like any other, and it's great to see her here at conference.
Isn't it helpful to have these discussions and debates behind closed doors?
That might be the Labour Party way, Gloria, but we like to have debate in the open.
So is it helpful on the eve of, Jeremy Hunt will be speaking to conference, but actually we're all talking about Liz Truss at the moment and what she's going to say. My argument, perhaps, is that it would be more helpful if she made those points. You have these forums in the Conservative Party, exist in all parties, put your case there, but she's doing it today at conference, in public.
All Tory MPs are welcome at Tory conference. Look forward to what she's got to say later on as she contributes to the debate that we're having within the party, which I think is a good thing for the country.
What do you think about tax cuts?
Well, I think the best tax cut we can deliver for people is to have inflation. That's the Prime Minister's #1 priority. I'm pretty sure that's what the Chancellor's going to be saying this afternoon. If we have inflation, get the economy growing again and invest in our future, we'll be delivering for the British people. That's what they expect us to do, and that would be the best thing that we could do for them.
Senior's the wrong word, a pollster, a prominent pollster by the name of Frank Luntz. He has said yesterday, if you are a Conservative MP with a majority of less than 8,000, it's time to look for a different job. Andrew, you will know your majority is 843.
Yeah.
What are you going to be doing this time next year?
This time next year, I hope to still be the Member of Parliament for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine. There's a lot of water to go under the bridge yet before the next general election, and myself and all of my colleagues are out fighting for every single vote. And I think we've got a strong record we can be proud of and a strong vision for the future of this country. And I'm going to be out there fighting, as I know my colleagues are in constituencies across the country. So polls are polls. The only poll that matters is the one that takes place on our election day. And the Scottish Tories have been written off many times before, and we're still here to tell the tale.
And there's a by-election on Thursday,
yes,
indeed.
There is. Yeah.
No mention of the Tories in that. You're not in the game, are you?
Oh, absolutely in the game. Thomas Kerr, a fantastic candidate. In fact, he's wandering around the
we're now going to have to list all the other candidates because you've named him.
I know you
we
are.
will bring that to you later.
No, he's fighting
in
a
the
good
programme.
fight. Obviously, it's an uphill battle. The media have framed it very much a battle between Labour and the SNP. But I think if you're a Conservative and you want to see strong representation for your local area from a chap who's delivered in council in Glasgow already, then I'd vote for Thomas Kerr.
Just to promise our viewers that we will list all the candidates in that by-election on Thursday in Rutherglen. Final question to you. You are an Energy Minister. Should the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt have taken a flight to conference from London to Manchester to attend conference? His train was cancelled, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been very difficult people getting to this conference as a result of the unwarranted, unnecessary train strikes that continue to blight the country. And so a lot of people had to find different ways of getting to Manchester than would otherwise have been the case. So I'm not going to criticise the Chancellor for having to make other plans and take a flight to conference. Quite a few people have been driving, flying, and using all sorts of means of getting to this conference venue. But as you can see behind me, the conference is really busy, it's buzzing, full of good ideas, and really determined to take on the Labour Party and fight for the future of this country.
How are you getting home on Wednesday?
I'll be flying home to Aberdeen.
OK, Andrew Bowie, thank you very much indeed. Back to Pip and Mark in the studio.
What seems to be a flying visit to Manchester on that ground. Gloria, thank you for that. Back to you throughout the afternoon, of course, but let's bring our political correspondent in, Catherine Forster, who's been out and about there finding out, what's happening on the fringes, because, it's centre stage, it seems, in about 20 minutes. A former Prime Minister about to put both feet in on the central question of tax.
Yes, Liz Truss absolutely is. Rishi Sunak is haunted by the ghosts of prime ministers past. I'll come back to that, but we're going to go for a little walk. But first of all, just to say, it's absolutely heaving here. This very lovely building was, in fact, once a railway station. If we can pan up, you can see the clock. the last train went out of here in 1969. So possibly an ironic venue for the Conservatives, who are mired in controversy, aren't they, about HS2. Will it come from Birmingham to Manchester? It sounds very much like it won't. So not everybody happy to see the Conservatives in Manchester at all. Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, has been, let's go for a walk. Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, has been talking this morning and really defending the government's record on trains, saying they've invested £100 billion over the last few years. They've electrified large amounts of railway line, but really the focus seems to have shifted to the motorist, following directly, I would suggest, from the government's unexpected victory in Uxbridge, where they campaigned against the ultra-low emission zone. They seem to have found a real passion for defending drivers, and they're going to have a big push on this. They think that's going to win them votes. And if the polls are to be believed, there have been about 20... Let's go this way. Let's go this way. They've been about 20 points behind for about a year, but they seem to be shifting. There was a poll the other day that had them at just, I use that word advisedly, just 10 points behind. So I think Rishi Sunak will take some comfort from that. What he will not take comfort from is firstly the freewheeling of lots of people who would really rather like his job. Kemi Badenoch, Trade Minister, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, yes, sure, she's a backbencher. She's a former Home Secretary. She's been having a go at Suella Braverman, saying ministers really shouldn't be jockeying for sort of position for a leadership campaign that they think will follow the general election. But of course, she hasn't ruled out being leader either. So, and worst of all, potentially, is the very prominent arrival of Rishi Sunak's predecessor, Liz Truss. I don't know whether we can go back any further. It's absolutely round. Can we go back a bit further? That is going to pull a lot of focus. She's going to be giving a big speech over in the Midland Hotel at about 12:30. That's going to get a huge amount of media attention. All around growth, we remember, of course, we've had pretty terrible growth since the financial crisis, and she is not sitting quietly on the sidelines. I should say she won't be the only former Prime Minister. Theresa May will be speaking at the Conservative Environment Network fringe event tonight. Plenty of people not too happy on that particular body about the government's softening of environmental pledges, but certainly Rishi Sunak struggling to provide a united front here in Manchester.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed for that, and a special award to our cameraman for walking backwards without bumping into the furniture. Very well done. Excellent.
Or bumping into anyone.
Or bumping into anyone.
Very possible, yeah. Well, Liz Truss, she is going to be speaking in about 15 minutes. One of those people that is very much backing what she has to say is the former Conservative Party chairman, Sir Jake Berry, who we understand is now with Gloria again.
Hello, Jake Berry.
Hey, good to see you. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's a pleasure. Liz Truss is going to speak. She's a great ally of yours. You served in her cabinet. Is it helpful to have these debates, to have her making these points at conference?
I mean, look, I think I don't know what Liz, seen it quite heavily trailed, not least here on GBNews, that she's going to be calling for tax cuts. Look, party conferences are where you traditionally have a debate about policy. This is the last conference we'll have before the general election, before that manifesto is written, or maybe the last conference we'll have. Certainly the last one we'll have before that manifesto is written. I think Liz is, having a stimulating debate in the party about the future of Conservatism. I welcome it.
And it was trailed that she wants to call on Rishi Sunak to revive Conservative values. Are Rishi Sunak, is Jeremy Hunt, are they both traditional Conservatives, or do they need a little bit of a nudge to remind them what...
Re-education. Look, no, I think Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt are fine Conservatives. We're just quite a broad party, and I think it's good that we hear these voices from, different viewpoints. But if you look at what Rishi Sunak has done recently, he's cut back on a lot of these net zero, very hard targets. We're still going to deliver net zero, but let's not ruin people's lives by doing it. We're hearing, good things from Jeremy Hunt and Michael Gove actually yesterday about wanting to go to cut taxes. My constituents in Rosendale and Darwen, they work really, really hard to earn the money that they take home at the end of the week with them. The government's dipping their pockets at the moment. It's taking too much out, and it's not unconservative to want to debate about how we can help people keep more of their own money in the first place.
Are you confident that Jeremy Hunt will deliver income tax cuts before that next general election, or perhaps even promise them in the Tory manifesto? What's your bottom line? What's your red line on this?
Well, it's not for me to have a red line. I'm just a backbench MP. It's the government to decide what we do. I think, people understand that, they work really hard to make their money. They don't want the government taking... We're taking 37% of all the national wealth to pay for public services. That's great. We need public services to rely on. But I think people just think that enough is enough. And that's why I've launched this tax pledge signed by 32 of my other colleagues saying we won't put taxes up anymore. It's a low bar. It's great to have so many Conservative MPs supporting it. And I think we've heard a change in the language from Jeremy Hunt and Michael Gove. Gloria, only this time last year, I was reflecting in the bath this morning as we were talking about, but only this time last year, Michael Gove was going around conference saying it is unconservative to promise to cut taxes. What a difference a year makes. Michael Gove, he's back in the game. Come on, Govey, let's get those taxes down.
And those 32 Tory MPs, you would
33, including me.
33, you would vote against?
No, we just won't vote for more tax increases. We're building the numbers.
You'd abstain on a budget?
Well, it depends. We'll have to wait and see. I don't think the government... I think because of this new block of Tory MPs, well, it doesn't stop the government raising taxes. They can still put tax up on cigarettes and alcohol. They've just got to find a way of saving it somewhere else. And I think with this new block of Conservative MPs, and we welcome members of Parliament from other parties, this isn't a pledge to the Conservative Party, it's a pledge to my voters in Rosendale and Darwen. I don't think the government will bring forward a budget with an increase in the overall tax budget because they will, they will understand that it is not supported by members of Parliament. But look, let me ask you this question, right? Why do taxes keep going up?
Well, you tell me.
No, you tell me. I'm asking the question.
Well, because the government keep putting them up.
It's because MPs keep voting for them. And that's what the tax pledge is about changing. Well, and I'll just say one final thing on it.
That's why you should say, if we won't do it anymore.
Well, that's what I have said. Yeah. I've made a pledge to my voters in Rosendale and Darwen that I won't put them up.
Of your colleagues?
Well, that's the start. We did it very quietly amongst MPs. We were getting, in fact, I got another one today. I'm going to be making an announcement shortly of our next tranche. But look,
okay.
You can't have it both ways. If we don't agree with people smoking, we put tax up on cigarettes. We don't agree with people drinking, although I bloody love a drink. We put tax up on alcohol. But, we're also putting taxes up on business. If taxes stop you doing bad things, why are we, putting taxes up on business? It's the economics of the blob. It's blobonomics. We need a lower tax, high growth economy. And I know that Jeremy Hunt, we're going to hear great things from him today. And I know that Jeremy Hunt's going to deliver that for us.
Jake Berry, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Lovely to be with you again, Gloria.
Thank you for your time. Straight talking from Jake Berry there. Back to Pip and Mark in the studio.
Gloria, thank you. And of course, we did mention that we've got a by-election this week on Thursday in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. And just to be clear, that we have these candidates. We'll give you the list now. Gloria Adebo for Scottish Liberal Democrats, Bill Bonar for Scottish Socialist Party, Gary Cook and Andrew Daly, Independent.
Cameron Eadie, Scottish Greens, Prince Ankit Love, Emperor of India, Niall Fraser, Scottish Family Party, Ewan Hoyle, Volt UK, Thomas Kerr, Scottish Conservatives, Katie Loudon, SNP, Chris Samani, Scottish Labour, David Stark, Reform UK, Colette Walker, Independents for Scotland Party.
And, of course, we'll have full coverage of that by-election for you here on Thursday on GB News. And coming up, as well as the full coverage of the party conference, Liz Truss due at that hotel in about 10 minutes. We're told the queues are snaking up and down the flights of the stairs at the Midland Hotel for her speech, even though it's a fringe. Also coming up, live from the picket lines, junior doctors joining consultants to launch their longest combined strike action yet. We'll have all the latest for you live here on the Live Desk.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Live to Manchester shortly, but let's reflect junior doctors and consultants joining forces today on the picket lines across the country. Their longest combined strike action so far in this long-running dispute with the government over pay.
Last week, nearly 27,000 staff were absent from work due to industrial action. And since strikes began, NHS England data shows that the total number of acute appointments rescheduled exceeded 1 million.
Well, some of those patients now opting to get their care within their own home, as our national reporter Theatre Comber has been finding out in Blackburn, Lancashire.
Well, if you go to the hospital, there's no guarantee you're going to be treated within, say, 8 hours.
Hi, Neil. It's only me.
Since February 2022, Neil has been receiving care from his home, which he describes as a godsend. Now he avoids long waits and says it puts less pressure on his family to take him to the hospital for routine checks and treatment.
A nurse coming to change my dressing on my foot every Tuesday, which is fantastic. You know, instead of having to trail up to Royal Blackburn, or maybe even go as far as Burnley. So that's great to have a nurse coming to change my bandage in my own home.
As a patient of the Royal Blackburn Hospital, clinical home care was set up for him to treat his severe eczema.
It does make a massive difference, particularly to people like Neil, because it's very difficult for him to mobilise outside of his home. It does impact on his family as well. But you know, so for people to have to get to the hospital each time they needed treatment is quite a big strain on them, really, together with the condition that they're already facing.
Across the country, junior doctors will be taking strike action for the 7th time, and it will be the second joint walkout for junior doctors and consultants.
As consultants' pay has been falling, more and more consultants are choosing to leave the NHS, leave the UK, and go and work in other countries where they are paid fairly and their terms and their conditions of working are better because they haven't got such a staffing crisis. In the UK, we're left with an NHS that has a workforce crisis because of this government's policies. That means that we never have enough doctors, and those that are working here are trying to cover the work for the doctors that aren't there.
As for Neil, he says the 2-hour appointments he gets at his home are invaluable at a time when NHS services and staff say they are feeling the pressure. Theo Chkomba, GB News, Blackburn.
Well, let's talk to GB News' national reporter Jack Carson, who we understand is outside Manchester at Royal Infirmary. Jack, the government calling again for doctors to step away from what they say is this incredibly damaging strike action.
Yeah, that's right, Pip. I mean, across NHS hospitals in England today, you're only going to get levels of service previously seen, of course, on Christmas Day every year because of this mass walkout, this joint strike between the junior doctors and those senior consultants as well. And it has led the NHS England Medical Director, Sir Stephen Powers, to come out and say that this is going to be an extremely challenging few days for them because, of course, it was only a couple of weeks ago when we had that first joint walkout, although that was only 24 hours. This is 72, and so the NHS struggling to keep up from the disruption that our last strike caused, and now, of course, having to deal with the disruption that this one causes as well. But, of course, the doctors were on the picket line here this morning. They were telling me all about why they've wanted to come out on the picket line today and why it's important that the government listen to them.
So I work as a consultant psychiatrist, and I can tell you that for the last 10 years, I don't think there has been a single period in which my hospital has not had to employ some temporary staff or some locum consultants. And that is because not only are we not training enough doctors, we are losing doctors. We are hemorrhaging talent to other places. And unless that happens, it means the quality of care can't be preserved. It means that patients can't get the standard of service that they rightly expect. And our medical schools that are training doctors will be training doctors that will go to other places. The message that we are saying is that we will continue to take the action we need to do until the government comes with us with a credible offer.
I'm prepared to keep striking until we see some negotiation. And that's the point. The government aren't coming to the table, and actually that's disingenuous to say it's an independent review body, because it's not independent at all. They've interfered with it. How can that possibly be independent? You know, for me, the problem is that over the past 10 to 15 years, we've seen attrition of our pay when you take into account inflation. We haven't kept pay parity with other similar professions, and perhaps it's not so much maybe about people at my stage. I'm a consultant. I'm probably going to be working until I'm 60. I'm 54 now, so that's not too long to go. But it's really about the next generation. They're having it really, really tough. You know, if people like me are dissatisfied and are burnt out because we are working longer and harder with fewer staff because they're leaving, you know, there is going to be nobody to train the next generation of doctors. The next generation of doctors, they've got young families. They can't afford their mortgages. They're getting poached and headhunted overseas. We see this all the time. And the medical students that are coming through, they're coming to the point of graduation, and then many of them are making a decision to leave medicine. So there's a lot of attrition at that point. And I've got medical students who I look after who are actually in the middle of their studies, who are looking at what's happening financially and now making a decision about whether they're going to carry on with their studies or not. So we are not planning for the future. There is going to be no staffing in the NHS. There's going to be no NHS in the future if we don't fight for our pay.
Yeah, well, obviously you heard there talking a lot about the future generation and what the next generation of doctors might well inherit in the form of an NHS, but of course bringing it back to present and the current generation, of course, trying to get care. New data out showing that over 1 million appointments and operations have had to be rescheduled since these NHS strikes in September, and that NHS waiting list now grows to 7.7 million people. So increasing waiting lists, and a new poll showing that actually 42% of people blame the government for the increase in those waiting times, only 15% alluding to, of course, this industrial strike action. But where it ends, we're not sure where there is an end in sight, of course, because Steve Barclay is not going to, of course, come back to the negotiating table, and so these strikes look to set to continue for some time.
Jack, thank you very much for updating us there on the picket line in Manchester. But let's stay in Manchester, but go over to the Midland Hotel. As we said, they were queuing up and down the stairs to hear a speech from Liz Truss, former Prime Minister.
Sense and transforming our media landscape. So long may it continue. Now, what we need to do as a party and as a country is make life easier and better for families across our land. And the way we're going to do that is by making Britain grow again. Progress. We made some progress. We've delayed the ban on boilers. We've delayed the ban on cars. But we need to do more, because it's Conservative solutions, it's Conservative arguments that are popular with the public, but it's also those arguments that are going to deliver. What I want to talk about today is 3 things that we can do now as Conservatives to really change the agenda. Axing the tax, cutting the bills, and building the homes. So let's start with axing the tax. We need to unleash business across Britain. We need people to want to invest in our country. We need businesses to be able to expand, to grow, to create new jobs, to create new ideas. That's why I'm calling upon the Chancellor at the autumn statement to put corporation tax back down to 19%. And frankly, if we can get it lower, the better. Because what we know is we know that when businesses are able to keep more of those funds, the future comes from. It's where the opportunities come from. It's where the jobs come from. And what we know is that at the moment, we're seeing businesses not locate in the United Kingdom. We saw AstraZeneca choose to locate elsewhere. We've seen small companies struggling with the level of tax and regulation. We've seen a flight out of Britain of high net worth individuals, third only to India and China, and in fact, ahead of Russia. So what we need to do is we need to be hungry to get those businesses back. We need to be hungry to attract business to our country, and we need to make the Conservative Party the party of business again. Because what we know is that economic growth and making Britain grow again is not going to be delivered by the Treasury. It's not going to be delivered by more public spending. It's not going to be delivered by more regulation. It's going to be delivered by giving businesses the freedom they need to succeed. It's going to be propelled by that. And the fact is that over the last 25 years, we've had relatively low economic growth. We've had relative economic stagnation. And the only thing that is going to break through that is businesses and entrepreneurs being able to do things differently, being able to invest, being able to grow, being able to build new factories, being able to employ people. That is what is going to drive our country forward. And as Conservatives, we need to be prepared to make that argument for business. Because business shouldn't be a cash cow to be milked. It's a future investment in our prosperity. The second thing we need to do is cut the bills. Now, people in Britain are paying some of the highest energy bills in Europe. And our businesses are also paying high energy bills. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we end up exporting jobs overseas. We end up producing them in Britain. And what we need to do is we need to cut those bills. And it's possible. It's possible to do that because we can see what's happened in the United States when they started using shale gas. We can see what's happened in other countries when they've seen a greater production of energy. And we can learn those lessons here in the United Kingdom. Now, some environmentalists will say using our own gas is not environmentally friendly. But how environmentally friendly is it to rely on regimes abroad, often whom have very poor records for our gas, to ship that gas into the United Kingdom, often at both environmental cost and financial cost? How environmentally friendly is that? And currently, we are projected to be importing 2 gas within 10 years. Now, we are sitting on 50 years' worth of sustainable gas. Can you imagine if we unleash that, what that would mean for households, what that would mean for businesses? Well, we can see from the United States that their energy bills are half what our energy bills are here. Can you imagine the impact it would have on the British economy if we did that? If we unleash that gas that we are sitting on at the moment into our economy. And the fact is that we have already made progress. We're now licensing new fields in the North Sea, but we need to make more progress. We need to unlock our potential, develop our economic security, deliver cheap bills for people across the country, which they're desperately in need of with the difficulties we have with cost of living, at the same time as making our industries efficient, effective and competitive. And the third thing we need to do is we need to build more homes. The fact is we haven't built enough homes. And it's incredibly difficult if you're a young person to get on the property ladder. It's incredibly difficult to even rent a property in big cities like Manchester and London. It's just far too expensive. And whilst lots of members of Parliament talk about building more homes, it's very difficult to actually get them to vote for reducing the regulation that's stopping the homes being built. It's all about protecting newts or installing a bat bridge. That appears to be the priority rather than building homes. So I think we need to turbocharge the incentives. We need to incentivise local areas to build more homes through giving them tax breaks if they're prepared to get rid of that red tape. And I think we need to do it at a level so we are building 500,000 new homes every year. I think that is the state we are now in. The prices are so high, the cost of living is so difficult for families that we need to build 500,000 homes every year. And that won't just mean people will find it easier to get into a home. People will find it easier to start a family because there will be more affordable housing. Employers will find it easier to employ people somewhere because their workers can afford homes. It will also save the government money. It will save the government money because we will cut our housing benefit bill. We won't need to intervene so much in the housing market because we are making the prices cheaper. And that is fundamental to what these reforms should be about. So there are 3 things we can do. We can axe the tax, we can cut the bills, and we can build the homes. But I'm under no illusion. I don't think this is necessarily easy for us to do. It's difficult. But we need to be prepared to do the difficult things because that is what will make Britain grow again. And all of the people in this room, mainly minus some of the members of the media, all of the people in this room need to be out there making those arguments because people need to hear those Conservative arguments again. The way we're going to bring the price of housing down or the price of energy down is not through a rent cap or price controls. It's through more supply. It's simply by having more of it. That's what will bring prices down. That is a free market Conservative argument. The second thing... And people need to hear these arguments again. The second thing we need to do is acknowledge where we are now. Now, some people have been claiming that we live in some kind of free market paradise in Britain, that somehow the problems we have are as a result of too much neoliberalism. Look at the facts. Government spending as a proportion of GDP is now 46%. It has not been higher since the 1970s, and in fact it was lower for most of the 1970s apart from 1975. That is the only year where government spending as a proportion of GDP has been higher. So we need to acknowledge that government is too big, that taxes are too high, and that we are spending too much. That's very important. And the final thing we need to do is actually bring these arguments home to people. So what does it actually mean for people across the United Kingdom that we haven't grown as much as we could have? Well, if we'd grown as much as America, if we had the same GDP per capita as America, the average Brit would be £9,000 better off. Now think what that means. Think what that means for the ability to buy a new car, the ability to go on holiday, the ability to buy something for your children. That makes a huge difference to the average person in Britain, and that is what we have to talk about. We have to talk about the results of this policy. So let's stop taxing and banning things. Let's instead build things and make things. Let's be prepared to make conservative arguments again, even if it's unpopular, even if it's difficult. I want everybody in this room to unleash their inner conservative. And finally, my friends, let's make Britain grow again. Thank you.
So this is Liz Truss leaving that podium at the Midland Hotel. And just to reflect, this is not actually in the conference itself. It is a fringe event. But let's bring in our political editor, Christopher Hope, who's been in the conference hall with the other people listening to that. What's been the reception within the conference itself, Chris?
Well, you can hear there, just that response there, that cheering in that room. Let's make Britain grow again is almost Trumpian. Let's make Britain great again, of course, is Donald Trump's appeal to his supporters for next year's election in America. And let's stop taxing things. Let's stop banning things. Let's build things and make things. That is red raw appeal to the Tory party's grassroots. Massive cheer there, of course, nowhere near where I am in the conference centre over the road there in the middle of the Midland Hotel. But that's what many, I think, activists have been missing. The halls often here is empty for the big speeches. They are in these fringe meetings. The activists have had this leader, Rishi Sunak, imposed over their heads by MPs. Liz Truss, and before that Boris Johnson, ousted by MPs. And that's where the tension is here at the Tory party conference, Mark.
Chris, it's only a year ago, of course, that Liz Truss was Prime Minister. She was speaking about growth, 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 and then a few weeks later, she was gone. How helpful do Tory MPs think it is for her to be present at this conference? Stop laughing, Mark.
Probably not that helpful, because we have got Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, speaking at 2 p.m. That normally is the big set-piece occasion, but of course I'm not sure how many are going to be in there, because we're going to hear news on things like the increased living wage, but things people want to hear about, which are tax cuts, will HS2 be built, are not going to be there. It's all going to be about productivity, getting more people back to work, cutting the benefits bill. That's what he wants to talk about. But I think what's the activists I speak to, they want to see more leg on tax cuts, and that's not what we'll hear from Jeremy Hunt.
Let's cut to the chase. What was the point of her speech? Because we didn't actually hear that much that was new. It's familiar fare in terms of growth in the economy, low tax and so on. But the timing and, of course, the positioning is very important just before Jeremy Hunt takes to the stage there in the conference.
That's right. It makes Jeremy Hunt have to answer what Liz Truss has said in that speech. That's not easy. I mean, she said there she wants to bring down corporation tax back to 19% and go lower, was what she said there. Cut bills, of course, and many people watching GB News here will be worrying about their bills, and build more homes, 500,000 a year. That's more than twice the 220,000 built currently per year. And that's where she wants to, so she said get on with it. The big problem with Liz Truss's growth agenda was last year when she went ahead of doing it before any idea of how to pay for it. The idea was more debt, and the markets didn't like that. The timing was very bad. But Liz Truss hasn't gone away. She's not apologetic. She's back here, back at the Tory party conference with her agenda. And next year, this time next year, we could be looking at a Tory leadership election, and Liz Truss will have a big role to play in that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at what the Shadow Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Darren Jones, made of what she was expected to say. I don't think he's reacted since she's been speaking, talking about the same fantasy economics that crashed the economy 12 months ago. And, of course, she has talked about let's leave the market find the solutions. Well, I mean, their verdict last time was basically to get rid of her and Kwasi Kwarteng.
Well, that's right. It's slightly unfair on Darren Jones, because I think the ideas that Liz Truss is pushing was certainly the agenda that she got the members of the party to vote her in for. But it was the rush, it was the lack of any workings from the Treasury. The Treasury bosses were fired as Kwasi Kwarteng came, or rather resigned as Kwasi Kwarteng came in, and that's the point. So where was the actual evidence of why? Who's going to pay for this? Who will pay the bills? Many people in the Tory party tell me they think Liz Truss was on the right track, but it was too much at once, in too much of a rush, and that was part of the problem.
Oh, Chris, can you still hear us? I was just saying, Chris, and the other problem being that they hadn't got the OBR on board to effectively mark their homework before releasing it to the public.
That was right. That was all a year ago. I think that's the warning, and that's where you've got Labour saying they're going to make sure that the OBR have a legal right to take action when a chancellor does something. So almost to tie the hands of future chancellors because of what Liz Truss did last year with Kwasi Kwarteng. So I think what we are seeing today is the eruption of this debate happening on the fringes. When you talk to people privately in the bars, like I've been doing at the party conference, this is what they're talking about: when the tax is going to be cut, how will the economy get growing, where is the actual appeal to Tory supporters.
Chris, you've covered many of these Tory party conferences. How unusual is this one? Liz Truss criticising the approach of her successor.
I can't think of a single time, Pippa, when we've seen a former Prime Minister or former Tory party leader take such aim at the record gone before. Normally, the party leaders are meant to take a vow of silence, like a Trappist monk, not appear again, and just go and do some good works for charity or write a book, a memoir. That should mean they're off the scene for a few years. But never, just literally not even a year after they quit, are they doing a fringe meeting, trying to challenge this government to do something that they couldn't do when they were in power. It's unusual. It's not a great look. We're looking into the Labour conference next week. I think number 10 won't be happy.
Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor, thank you for your analysis there. Peak ScotRail fares are being scrapped from today in a 6-month trial which aims to encourage more people to travel by train instead of by car.
Indeed. Doesn't seem to have worked in Manchester, of course. However, this project, funded by the Scottish Government to allow customers to travel all day at off-peak fares until the end of March 2024.
ScotRail said the trial will see massive savings across the country. For example, the fare from Edinburgh to Glasgow via Falkirk High will drop from £28.90 to £14.90.
Let's go live to Glasgow now and speak to our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire, who's been checking his wallet to see where he can afford to get to. And as with an awful lot of other people, I guess, Tony, because there's a huge difference, of course, between these off-peak and what effectively are rush hour fares.
Yes, that's correct, Mark. Certainly this is quite a welcome a few pounds in the pockets of Scots as this cost of living crisis continues on. And as you mentioned there, that's quite an extravagant saving, about £15 each journey. Now that adds up to obviously around £75 a week. And then onwards we're looking at savings of around £1,800 over the course of this 6 months trial. So the Scottish Government has put 15 million into this plan, and obviously over the course of the next few months, their hope is that more people will leave the cars parked in the driveway and turn to trains. Now, some of the more frequent commuters that make journeys around Scotland, well, they're used to getting the season tickets. Now, those prices won't change any, neither will the Flexi Pass, and indeed the super off-peak tickets, well, they were also withdrawn by ScotRail. But on the face of it, for these individual tickets, it's going to be quite a huge saving. Now, Humza Yousaf, he spoke out yesterday and he said that he hoped that this was finally going to be a chance to make rail more accessible, available and affordable, as well as obviously boosting the green credentials. But of course it wasn't so long ago, in 2021, and perhaps even sooner, where it was actually more expensive to get from Glasgow to London by train than it was by plane. Now, that wasn't particularly a good look, and of course 18 months ago finally we saw the renationalisation of ScotRail, and hopefully a lot of commuters will be hoping that this new scheme to really tear down the barriers of expensive rail travel, which has gone up and up in previous years, including even a 5% increase to rail tickets as soon as July there, that this is hopefully going to bring people back to the rails. Of course, ScotRail have been reported around 70% down on pre-COVID levels when it comes to commuters using the services around Scotland, but post-COVID, we have to, make allowances for the fact that a lot of people are working from home, either hybrid or remote working. So, first day of the trial, we'll certainly see how things shape up over the weeks and months ahead.
And, of course, how they cope with industrial action still bedeviling the tracks on many of the UK's rail lines as well. Tony, for the moment in Glasgow, thank you very much indeed. Well, as we were saying, many people turned up at Manchester by plane, by car, not by rail. But one man who got there by air has been wearing a hard hat for some particular reason today. Could it be anything to do with his speech later?
Well, he might need to do a bit of ducking this afternoon after his speech at the Tory party conference, because although the former Prime Minister Liz Truss is calling for taxes to be cut, doesn't sound like that's what Jeremy Hunt is planning to do, due to what he says are inflationary pressures. Yeah, trying to do some numbers, it seems, there on that wall, but clearly he is indicating in terms of this keynote speech too that he's going to be looking at the minimum wage and trying to encourage people back into work rather than taking benefits, but also this huge question on tax, with Liz Truss again calling for corporation tax cut to 18% or 19%. Let's stop taxing, she said, and get Britain growing, indicating that if we had the same GDP or growth in the economy as the US, the average Briton will be £9,000 better off. Yeah, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, will be live from the Conservative Party conference this afternoon, and we will be bringing it to you here on GB News from Manchester. Stay with us, we'll have the latest for you.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Something of a north-south split with the weather today, and then the potential for some pretty heavy rain over parts of central and eastern England tonight. So there's two areas of low pressure. This one moving up from the south is bringing some quite warm air, but it's also bringing a lot of clouds and a damp and drizzly feel across southwest England, much of North Wales. Slight rain and drizzle on and off here, pushing into northwest England too. Something a bit brighter over parts of eastern England, and some good spells of sunshine for Scotland and Northern Ireland, although plenty of showers also coming in on a brisk wind across the Highlands and the Western Isles. Temperatures here in the mid-teens. Further south, with a bit of brightness, we could easily creep into the 20s. But then later on, the rain is likely to turn heavier over the Midlands, particularly the East Midlands, through parts of Lincolnshire during the evening, and especially for parts of Norfolk. We could catch some thunderstorms that could drop a lot of rain in a short space of time before that all tends to clear away overnight. Temperatures holding up in the south, quite a warm night here, something a little cooler further north, but still most towns and cities in double digits. On to Tuesday, and we still start off with a lot of cloud over East Anglia and the southeast. A little bit of rain here early on too, but that should clear away. Then skies brighten. Most places will see a mixture of sunshine and showers on Tuesday, with most of the showers across northern England and Scotland, and a largely dry afternoon further south. A bit breezy, but temperatures in the sunshine again in the southeast over 20 degrees.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show, that's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it is 1 o'clock and you're with the Live Desk here on GB News. Coming up this Monday lunchtime.
A call to cut taxes and get Britain moving. A message from a former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, speaking outside the Tory party conference. The fringe speech saying that cutting taxes would unleash business and create more jobs.
But she is at odds with the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, who is expected to reject calls for big tax cuts anytime soon. We'll have his speech live from the Tory party conference in Manchester.
Junior doctors joining consultants to launch their longest combined strike yet, a 3-day walkout in their long-running dispute over pay. But what will break the deadlock?
also take our hats off to Europe's victorious Ryder Cup team. But just why has golf become such a bogey sport? First, let's tee off with all your news headlines. Here's Ray Addison.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Our top story this hour, Liz Truss has called on the Chancellor to cut corporation tax back to 19% in the next autumn statement. Speaking at a fringe rally event, the former Prime Minister urged the Tory leadership to axe the tax, cut bills and build homes. Ms Truss said businesses are now choosing not to locate in the United Kingdom and they shouldn't be treated like a cash cow to be milked. Well, meanwhile, the government says no substantial tax cuts are possible this year. Speaking to GB News, Jeremy Hunt ruled out any reductions in income or inheritance tax. He blamed an increase in the government's debt interest payments and said his priority is to bring inflation right down.
Well, I'm saying that no tax cuts are possible in a substantial way at the moment. So it's not just inheritance tax, it's income tax, it's all the different taxes that people look at. If we start having big tax cuts, it would be inflationary. And when we've got inflation at 6.7%, it's come down a lot, but it needs to come down a lot more. And the fastest way we can give help to families who are finding life really tough is to get inflation right down. And that's the priority of me and the Prime Minister.
Efforts to reduce carbon emissions won't come at the expense of bill payers. That's according to the Energy Secretary. Speaking at the Tory party conference in Manchester, Claire Coutinho said protest groups such as Just Stop Oil are out of touch with taxpayers.
It is these zealots that would see the cause of climate change lost. They are more concerned with signalling their own purity than with energising the cause of climate change. They don't seek to persuade, only to disrupt. They don't want to engage, only to silence. Conference, that is the Labour Party for you.
The Chancellor's announcement comes ahead of his conference speech this afternoon, in which he'll announce tougher rules on benefits. Jeremy Hunt says he'll make it harder for people to claim welfare while they refuse to take active steps to get work. Meanwhile, as part of plans to get more people employed, he'll also announce a boost to the national living wage, which will go up to at least £11 an hour from April. Junior doctors and consultants in England have started a 3-day walkout. It's the longest ever period of joint strike action. Until Thursday at 7 a.m, they'll deliver what's being described as Christmas Day levels of staffing. Their last joint strike in September led to almost 130,000 appointments being rescheduled. The government says the walkout is doing a massive disservice to patients. These doctors told us why they've walked.
Unless there is a credible pay offer, it will mean that doctors of all grades, but especially senior doctors, will continue to leave the country for other places, and the NHS will continue to suffer.
We are not planning for the future. There is going to be no staffing in the NHS. There's going to be no NHS in the future if we don't fight for our pay. So this isn't really necessarily a fight about individual consultant pay per se. We're actually fighting for the very future of the NHS.
GB News can reveal that more than 25,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel so far this year. Around 350 migrants in up to 8 boats were intercepted by Border Force vessels and brought ashore to Dover Harbour this morning. On Saturday, 537 people crossed in 9 small boats. That's according to official figures released by the Home Office. Water companies want to increase household bills by £156 a year by 2030. It's part of plans to fund upgrades and prevent 140,000 annual sewage spills. Industry regulator Ofwat says they will forensically scrutinise the scheme to ensure the price hike is justified. It's expected to face a backlash from customers struggling with the cost of living. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now let's get back to Mark and Pip.
Ray, thanks very much and welcome back to the live desk. What seems to be some taxing times for the Tory leadership at the party conference in Manchester. Both Rishi Sunak and Chancellor Jeremy Hunt having to fend off demands for immediate big tax cuts. The loudest calls coming this lunchtime Yes, from former Prime Minister Liz Truss and her allies.
Liz Truss says the Conservatives need to stop taxing and banning and start building and making. But with the Chancellor ruling out any further tax cuts this year, the party conference seems anything but united. Well, let's cross to Gloria De Piero, who is with Dr. Liam Fox, who is the former International Trade Secretary. And maybe, Gloria, he can answer that very question. How united is the Tory party at the moment?
Cheers, Pip. Well, we're going to get the benefit of your wisdom. 3 decades as a Conservative MP. So, Liz Truss, she's just finished speaking. Government is too big, taxes are too high, and we are spending too much. She's right, isn't she?
Well, it's hardly a revelation at a Tory party conference. I mean, the government is too big, many of us believe, and spending is too high, but that's the easy bit. So if you want taxes to come down, which bits of spending do you want to cut? Or how do you get higher levels of growth and prosperity into the economy? So it's easy. The sloganising is the easy part. The policy part's the more difficult part. And it's got to be done in a way that's responsible, remembering that we are a country that borrows a lot of money, and we have to maintain the confidence of the international markets.
Is it helpful for Liz Truss to be here making these arguments in public, or does it fracture a delicate unity?
I think the arguments are always there. The Tory party is perpetually in that discussion about how big the state should be, how high or low taxes ought to be. That's a proper debate to have in a democratic society. It's healthy that we do that. But we need to be focusing, I think, on how we create more wealth in our economy. We can't be in a perpetual discussion about is it more taxes for higher spending or lower taxes for less spending. We need also to talk about how we create more prosperity in our economy and deal with the elements, particularly for small businesses, that could be holding back their growth potential.
So you're with Jeremy Hunt, who is speaking to the conference this afternoon, that it's just not possible to contemplate any big income tax cuts.
Well, there are 2 questions in that. Number one is, can we afford to reduce taxes at all? And if we can, where should they be? I think that we will probably see a little more headroom as we go through the autumn and the winter. The reason for that being that as inflation comes down, the amount of government debt interest we have to pay goes down. This year, it looks as though we'll spend something like £100 billion on debt interest. That's the second biggest government spending after the NHS, for which we get nothing at all. You know, not a soldier, not a nurse, not a doctor, nothing at all. So, but as inflation falls, that number falls quite quickly. So at 5% inflation, for example, which was the government halving the target, that saves about £50 billion. So there may be some headroom by the time we get to the spring.
Inheritance tax, there seems to be a live debate in your party on inheritance tax. That would be like a big tax cut for the richest. Do you back it?
I would prefer to see any tax cuts on the wealth creating part of our economy. I want to see more small businesses thrive, because ultimately they will grow and pay the taxes that will enable us to have the spending. And I think that rather than reductions in any form of personal taxation, we should be looking at how we get those small businesses. Remember, only 17.5% of the population are in the public sector in Britain. 82.5% are in the private sector. Most of those are in small businesses. So that's where jobs are created. That's where wealth is created in the economy. We need to focus on how we grow our wealth as a country, not just how we spend it.
And for those not in work, those who have worked all their lives, the triple lock, is it affordable? Is it the right thing to do?
Well, whether it's affordable or not is dependent on how well the economy is performing. Of course, it looks at different elements. Inflation, it's been very expensive this year because inflation's been high, but then it's also pushed up debt interest, as I say. I think there are strong arguments for it. In principle, that those who have no other means of getting income and have worked all their lives are protected. I think that's a strong point of principle. Whether the triple lock is too expensive, you know, is a technical question, but there's no doubt that in principle those who are on pensions need to be protected, and they need to have the standard of living rising at least as quickly as the earning public.
And can I get the benefit of your wisdom on general election timing? You've seen great victories, you've seen great Tory defeats. If you were advising. I'm sure you speak to Rishi Sunak all the time, but when should you go?
When it looks like you're going to win.
Go on, what do you reckon?
So
When's that going to be?
So I think that at the moment the public opinion is quite fluid on the doorstep.
Right.
A lot of people who might be a bit sullen about the government are certainly not attracted to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. I yet don't know what they stand for in any serious policy debate. And I think that if we see inflation fall, if we see the economy picking up in terms of speed, people will be worried about disrupting that and gambling on an unknown quantity like Keir Starmer and his Labour Party. So I think that if you look at the opinion polls, it's not unusual for governments to recover quite sharply as they go into their final year.
And you don't think this is a 1997 type scenario? You don't think that you can form a majority Tory government, though, surely?
Yes, I do.
Really?
And I think there is certainly a pathway to victory. And funnily enough, I was looking at the polls the other night, and since you're looking for the benefit of wisdom, so I was looking at one election when actually on the Sunday we had a shock poll that said that we were behind Labour for the first time in the campaign, and that was Mrs Thatcher's victory in 1979. So I take the polls always with a pinch of salt. To say politicians don't look at polls, of course, is profoundly dishonest. We all look at them, but I think that you can put too much emphasis on polls. And remember, in 1992, we were all expecting that there would be a Labour victory according to the polls. And I remember sitting in the car as the first results came in, thinking we're going to win.
Yeah. Final question, and this is not about, well, it is about politics, but actually it's about getting the benefit of your thoughts as a former GP. We've got the NHS walkout today. We've got constant strikes. People say that they are fighting for the future of the NHS.
No, they're not fighting for the future of the NHS. They're fighting for their salaries. And lots of doctors are not on strike. When the railways go on strike, we're always very careful to say it's the RMT or it's the ASLEF or whatever. This is the BMA that are on strike. A very large number of doctors are not taking part in this action. The real heroes on the NHS are not the ones on the picket lines, it's the ones on the wards and the doctors who are covering their absent colleagues. I actually think that for doctors, particularly to strike junior doctors and consultants at the same time, is actually unethical.
Always good to talk to you, Liam Fox. Thank you for being with us on GB News. Pip, Mark, that's the view from a Tory grandee.
Cephalogist as well, it seems now. Perhaps an extra string to the bow there in terms of looking at those polls and what might happen. But interesting chat. Thank you very much, Gloria. Back to you, of course, throughout the afternoon, because we've got a speech from someone who's preparing for that by wearing one of these.
Might need it this afternoon.
Jeremy Hunt with his hard hat on because he's been visiting, a building site a little earlier. But, of course, the message perhaps not lost on some observers there in Manchester.
Liz Truss not long ago gave a speech at a fringe event. She wasn't on the main stage like the Chancellor will be at 2 o'clock. She was speaking at a fringe event and she did get quite a few cheers as she used her speech to call for a cut in corporation tax. She wants corporation tax cut to some 19% to attract and keep business in the UK. Now, let's not forget Liz Truss, her premiership. It was quite short, to say the least. It was a total of 49 days, but there were a lot of people that wanted to hear her in the last half hour or so, and I wonder, Mark, if Jeremy Hunt was listening.
Well, indeed, although he may say he was rather busy with his hard hat on. But let's just reflect that, of course, Liz Truss saying, let's stop taxing, reflecting that if we had the same growth in the economy as the US, each Briton would be £9,000 better off. However, Jeremy Hunt was speaking to many journalists this morning, and he was indicating that it's not possible to do any substantial tax cuts in the immediate term because of the battle against inflation and because our debt interest payments are so high. Why is that? Well, of course, the gilt markets reacted to a certain mini-budget from Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. So maybe there's a reflection on that. But certainly, he says he does not rule out tax cuts next year. But we have to be prepared to take difficult decisions, he says, to make that happen. We're also expecting, in his speech at 2:30, an indication that the national living wage will be raised to £11 an hour from next April. But with that hand in hand, making it harder for people to claim welfare when refusing to take active steps to get back to work.
Well, let's get some analysis from our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, like I just said to Mark a few moments ago, would Jeremy Hunt have been listening to Liz Truss's speech or just focusing on his?
Well, he's focusing on his. He's got to, hasn't he? And he can't go range as widely as Liz Truss is able to do as a former Prime Minister with her own agenda, of course, which many would say brought her government down just over a year ago. But no question he'll be looking at that. He does tell us he wants to cut taxes. He's in charge, though, of the purse strings. He can't afford to do that until inflation is under control. And that's why the briefing here is about tax cuts in March next year, the budget, and not in the autumn statement in November.
What do we make of Liz Truss's intervention? Because there is an unwritten convention, isn't there? As a former Prime Minister, you step back into the shadows, you keep your counsel. Theresa May did that for a while. But here is Liz Truss going in both barrels on a central question of tax and growth in the economy.
That's right. There are no rules, though, Mark. I mean, this is what you're expected to do as a former Prime Minister, but of course not everyone follows those rules, not least Liz Truss. She's basically making life difficult for the Chancellor. No question that all the bulletins you'll see on GBNews tonight will probably compare and contrast the more muted supporting and applause for Jeremy Hunt in the chamber when he speaks at 2 o'clock today, with the cheering and the wild applause for Liz Truss just over the road from where I'm sitting here at the Midland Hotel. That response there, the cheering that she got, saying there at the end, I thought fascinating here, let's stop taxing and banning things, let's build things and make things, let's make Britain grow again. I mean, that is absolute rhetoric which the grassroots want to hear more of, many voters may want to hear more of, and it's not really the same way, that's not what Jeremy Hunt can say.
Because what's interesting is that she is still very popular among grassroots activists because they voted for her. They didn't vote for Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister.
That's right, of course. This time last year, Liz Truss was Prime Minister, and I was here when I chaired a fringe meeting. Suella Braverman talked about a coup, literally a coup against Liz Truss, and no one believed her. Well, she was gone within 3 weeks, and a coup of sorts took place against her by her own MPs who were unhappy with the pace of the reforms and changes that she unveiled in that mini budget, which was never meant to be a budget. And that's why I think this is the first time the grassroots have got back into one place. And then I'm looking at Rishi Sunak, wondering who is this person? He wasn't voted for by the grassroots. Boris Johnson was forced out by MPs, so was Liz Truss. There was a suspicion here between the grassroots and MPs, and that fissure between those two groups has not been healed yet. The hope for the number 10 is that they can get past this, see more like with the net zero changes we saw last week, find ways to appeal to the grassroots to make them bring them back on side.
We're just learning, Chris, that the anti-Brexit protester Steve Bray has been, as Press Association said, forcibly ejected from a fringe event there, the right-wing Bruges group at the Friends Meeting House. We've also got reports of thousands of protesters out in the streets in Manchester at the conference. Give us an indication about how febrile the atmosphere is there.
It's not as bad as previous years, Mark, because the protesters are being kept some way away from where we are, and so you can actually get into the conference area unmolested, unshouted out. But it is quite tricky. I was called some rude words last night because someone thought I was a Tory. I'm not a Tory. I'm a political reporter for GB but I let it pass. But I think there's a bit of tension. There always is in Manchester, it seems. I think the police are being a bit tougher this year than they have been in previous years on dealing with protesters.
That'll teach you to wear a spotted tie like that, of course. A big
You might need a hard hat like Jeremy Hunt.
Chris, for the moment, thank you for that. Back to you, of course, throughout the afternoon. As we say, Jeremy Hunt due at 2:30. Now, staying in Manchester, because we've been featuring the picket line there, junior doctors and consultants with their longest combined strike so far. We'll be hearing how some patients now taking the care into their own homes. That coming up for you in a moment.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel. Welcome back to the Live Desk. Let's update you on the latest industrial strife, with junior doctors and consultants joining forces on the picket lines across the country today in what's the longest combined strike so far in their long-running dispute with the government over pay.
Last week, nearly 27,000 staff were absent from work due to industrial action, and since strikes began, NHS England data shows that the total number of acute appointments rescheduled exceeded 1 million.
And of course, more will follow as a result of these 3 days of action. Well, some of those patients now opting to get care in their own homes, as our national reporter Theo Shikombo has been finding out in Blackburn.
Well, if you go to the hospital, there's no guarantee you're going to be treated within, say, 8 hours.
Hi, Neil. It's only me.
Since February 2022, Neil has been receiving care from his home, which he describes as a godsend. Now he avoids long waits and says it puts less pressure on his family to take him to the hospital for routine checks and treatment.
A nurse coming to change my dressing on my foot every Tuesday, which is fantastic. You know, instead of having to trail up to Royal Blackburn, or maybe even go as far as Burnley. So that's great to have a nurse coming to change my bandage in my own home.
As a patient of the Royal Blackburn Hospital, clinical home care was set up for him to treat his severe eczema.
It does make a massive difference, particularly to people like Neil, because it's very difficult for him to mobilise outside of his home. It does impact on his family as well. But so for people to have to get to the hospital each time they needed treatment is quite a big strain on them, really, together with the condition that they're already facing.
Across the country, junior doctors will be taking strike action for the 7th time, and it will be the second joint walkout for junior doctors and consultants.
As consultants' pay has been falling, more and more consultants are choosing to leave the NHS, leave the UK, and go and work in other countries where they are paid fairly and their terms and their conditions of working are better because they haven't got such a staffing crisis. In the UK, we're left with an NHS that has a workforce crisis because of this government's policies. That means that we never have enough doctors, and those that are working here are trying to cover the work for the doctors that aren't there.
As for Neil, he says the 2-hour appointments he gets at his home are invaluable at a time when NHS services and staff say they are feeling the pressure. Theo Chkomba, GB News, Blackburn.
Let's speak to GB News' national reporter Jack Carson, who joins us from the Manchester Royal Infirmary. Jack, it's a case, here we go again. We'll still be here in this same deadlock in a year's time. That's what it feels like for people at the moment.
Well, certainly, and as that data comes out today, which says that over 1 million appointments have now had to be rescheduled since December, when, of course, all these NHS strikes started. Patients across the country, some of them are having to have appointments or operations scheduled not once, not twice, but possibly 3 times in some cases. So they're certainly feeling the brunt of this industrial action. And, of course, in terms of where they go from here, well, we don't really know, because the government aren't going to come back to the table. It's been over 100 days since Steve Barclay last negotiated with the British Medical Association, and of course they accepted that independent pay review body offer, 8.8% on average for junior doctors and a 6% rise on average for those more senior consultants. So that's the offer that the government have put to the BMA. It's the offer that these doctors will automatically get as part of that independent pay review body recommendation. But of course they still want more. Junior doctors wanting up to 35%, they say, to reflect, of course, on historic losses of pay rises with inflation. But earlier on at the picket line here at the Manchester Royal Infirmary, I spoke to a couple of doctors about why they've joined the picket line today.
So I work as a consultant psychiatrist, and I can tell you that for the last 10 years, I don't think there has been a single period in which my hospital has not had to employ some temporary staff or some locum consultants. And that is because not only are we not training enough doctors, we are losing doctors. We are hemorrhaging talent to other places. And unless that happens, it means the quality of care can't be preserved. It means that patients can't get the standard of service that they rightly expect. And our medical schools that are training doctors will be training doctors that will go to other places. The message that we are saying is that we will continue to take the action we need to do until the government comes with us with a credible offer.
I'm prepared to keep striking until we see some negotiation. And that's the point. The government aren't coming to the table, and actually that's disingenuous to say it's an independent review body, because it's not independent at all. They've interfered with it. How can that possibly be independent? For me, the problem is that over the past 10 to 15 years, we've seen attrition of our pay when you take into account inflation. We haven't kept pay parity with other similar professions, and perhaps it's not so much maybe about people at my stage. I'm a consultant. I'm probably going to be working until I'm 60. I'm 54 now, so that's not too long to go. But it's really about the next generation. They're having it really, really tough. If people like me are dissatisfied and are burnt out because we are working longer and harder with fewer staff because they're leaving, there is going to be nobody to train the next generation of doctors. The next generation of doctors, they've got young families. They can't afford their mortgages. They're getting poached and headhunted overseas. We see this all the time. And the medical students that are coming through, they're coming to the point of graduation, and then many of them are making a decision to leave medicine. So there's a lot of attrition at that point. And I've got medical students who I look after who are actually in the middle of their studies, who are looking at what's happening financially and now making a decision about whether they're going to carry on with their studies or not. So we are not planning for the future. There is going to be no staffing in the NHS. There's going to be no NHS in the future if we don't fight for our pay.
Well, Jack, of course, you're outside that major hospital in Manchester, not far from the conference, of course, where we heard Dr. Liam Fox speaking to Gloria Little earlier, former GP, saying it's not doctors who are on strike, it's the BMA. And that, I guess, gives an indication about how far the gulf is between the two sides.
Yeah, it does feel like these strikes are becoming ever increasingly political rather than necessarily on some of the issues that are going on maybe inside the NHS that the BMA have obviously previously campaigned on. I mean, in a Wes Streeting interview, of course, that he gave to GB News just a couple of weeks ago, he said that it could be up to year 5 of a Labour government that they actually are able to restore the junior doctors to that 35% pay increase that they want. So even with a Labour government, it doesn't necessarily look like these junior doctors would get some of the demands that they're asking for. But in terms of the BMA's position, their chairman, Professor Phil Banfield, has said that doctors aren't the problem. He says they don't want to be on strike. They just want to be recognised by the government as the highly skilled practitioners they are. And of course, we do know that public support still remains with the doctors as, of course, these strikes continue.
Jack, outside Manchester Royal Infirmary, thanks very much for updating us there. Thank you.
Well, in the next half hour, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will be giving his keynote speech at the Tory party conference in Manchester. We will be bringing you that here on GB News. First, here's your headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Pip. It's 1:31. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top story, Donald Trump is due to arrive at a court in New York, where he's due to stand trial in a civil fraud case. Now, we can see pictures coming to us live from Manhattan now. The former US president is accused of inflating the value of his assets by billions of dollars to secure better loan and insurance terms. Comes a week after the judge found that Mr. Trump was liable for fraud and will largely concern the penalties that he must now face. The prosecutor is seeking $250 million in fines and a permanent ban against Trump from running businesses in New York. And lots of protesters there to greet him and receive him as he arrives. We'll have more on that as we get it. Well, Liz Truss has called on the Chancellor to cut corporation tax back to 19% in his next autumn statement. Speaking at a fringe rally, the former Prime Minister urged the Tory leadership to axe the tax, cut bills and build homes. Ms Truss said that businesses are now choosing not to locate in the UK and they shouldn't be treated like a cash cow to be milked.
We need to unleash business across Britain. We need people to want to invest in our country. We need businesses to be able to expand, to grow, to create new jobs, to create new ideas. That's why I'm calling upon the Chancellor at the autumn statement to put corporation tax back down to 19%. And frankly, if we can get it lower, the better.
Well, Liz Truss's comments come just hours after the government said no substantial tax cuts are possible this year. Speaking to GB News, Jeremy Hunt ruled out any reductions in income or inheritance tax. Junior doctors and consultants in England have started a 3-day walkout. Until Thursday at 7 a.m, they'll deliver what's being described as Christmas Day levels of staffing. Their last joint strike in September led to almost 130,000 appointments being rescheduled. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Live Desk. We had a certain Liz Truss, former Prime Minister, of course, speaking at a fringe event in Manchester about half an hour ago. And as part of her stall being set out, she said we need to axe the tax, cut the bills and build the homes. Well, quite a few of them talking about incentivising local areas to build 500,000 new homes each year. Let's get the views now. Rachel McLean, who's the Minister for Housing and Planning, can join us there in Manchester. That's a tall order, isn't it? 500,000 is pie in the sky, isn't it?
Yeah, hi. Well, thanks for having me on. Obviously, I've been in a huge number of fringe events talking about how we can build the homes the country needs. And where I do agree with Liz is we need to build more houses than we currently are, but we have a number of pieces of work going on to address that, and I'm confident that we will be able to do a lot better against our housing targets when we've made those changes. We have to take these long-term decisions. They won't be popular with everybody, but that's how we have to think about what's needed for the country's future.
Rachel, one thing that Liz Truss was suggesting was that environmental red tape could be torn up to allow all these extra new homes. Is that something that you support?
It depends what you mean. Some of it does need to be torn up, and we've seen that with this area of nutrient neutrality. Those are a set of defective EU laws that we've inherited. We've now left the EU. We don't need to stick to their way of looking at this. We brought forward some proposals to actually remove those laws to enable us to build 100,000 homes that actually have planning permission. But unfortunately, the Labour Party voted all that down in the Lords, which just goes to show that despite everything that they say about being on the side of the builders, not the blockers, it's absolutely a load of nonsense. And they just flip-flopped and changed their minds. But we do absolutely need to address some of these issues.
Yeah, now, part of the sort of whole picture on infrastructure is transport. As you all know, there has been huge conjecture about the future of HS2 to get to Manchester. ITV News reporting the decision has been taken, that it will be shelved, and that Rishi Sunak basically says that the billions will go to other transport sections there in the north. What would that do for levelling up?
Well, clearly ITV News knows more than I do. As far as I'm aware, no decision has been made. But I think the point is the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are right to look at these long-term decisions. We have spent billions of pounds on HS2. Yes, there are very strong arguments for doing it. And as a West Midlands MP, I know the importance of it to the local economy. But at the same time, there are huge demands on the public finances and taxpayers' money, and infrastructure and transport infrastructure is needed all across the country. Look, I'm not really close enough to come up with a definitive answer, especially not in a very short segment.
But Rachel,
I do think it's important to look at all of this and see what the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are coming forward with.
Rachel, you say you're not close enough to it, but do you not think it was a little bit fishy that the Transport Secretary Mark Harper did not mention HS2 once in his speech?
Well, as I say, I haven't actually been able to attend any of these speeches because I've literally been in about
he
10,
didn't mention. I'm telling you,
events,
Rachel,
so
he did not mention it once.
He didn't mention it.
So is that not a little bit of a clue what's going on here?
Well, you might be speculating about that. But as I've said, look, I'd be very interested to see what the decision is. It's not a decision for me, but ultimately I agree with the principle that if we're spending billions of pounds of public money, of taxpayers' money, we do need to look carefully at where it's being spent. But what I don't agree with, actually, is a sort of criticism that this is a sort of an attack on levelling up, because at the same time, just this week, you've seen £1 billion worth of investment going into towns all across the country. You've seen devolution, free ports, investment zones. We have a very ambitious programme of levelling up, and we need to obviously deliver that so people can feel the difference. It's not just all about HS2, even though that is important.
OK, what we do know is that Jeremy Hunt, who will be giving this keynote speech fairly shortly, has been telling reporters that they're looking into HS2 to find out why it's so expensive and why it's faced so many issues. Now, the problem is the Tory government's had 13 years to do that. How have you let it get so badly out of control?
I think that is the right question to be asking about the planning system. One of my areas where I am the minister responsible is for planning, and I know there are a number of issues in the planning system. When you say why hasn't it been fixed in this particular time, a lot of factors have fed into this. We've had the pandemic, we've had war in Ukraine, we've had these existential pressures on our supply chain. But actually, we did start a few years ago looking at the planning system, starting to take those long-term strategic decisions, looking at the infrastructure as a whole. Some of those are going to start feeding through very soon, actually. So we are taking action across a number of areas. And as I said, they won't be popular for everybody, but we have to think about planning as an infrastructure project, and we do need to make those changes so we get better at it.
But there are key questions, aren't there? You know, were you sold a pup by developers, by the rail planners, by the engineers, or is it that basically it was a decision to get it done at whatever cost and, you know, pay the bill when it's all done?
So I think that is a huge question, and the HS2 was started way before I even thought about going into politics, let alone became an MP. So you're asking questions, I think, that sort of stem back into the last government. And I know that lots of ministers have looked at this, and I'm sure that there are those questions that you're asking are the right questions. They are fundamental questions, as in how did we get in this position where we have not been able to deliver this huge infrastructure project. We need to look at where we have got it right. We have got it right in some areas. We have been quite successful at delivering infrastructure in some other areas in terms of transport and some other things, and some of our energy projects in particular, and some of those net zero projects. We need to learn lessons from that and make sure that we don't make these mistakes if we are embarking on these big projects. And actually, in our department, we are looking quite fundamentally at the planning system to enable us not only to deliver the housing that people need in local areas, but also some of these big strategic projects, because we need to do that in the national interest.
Can I ask you one last question, Rachel? Did you travel by rail to get to the conference?
I didn't. I drove because I need to stay here until Wednesday to hear the Prime Minister, and there are no trains. So unfortunately, I had to drive. So that was very disappointing because normally I would have got the train.
OK, Rachel McLean, thank you very much for joining us there at conference in Manchester. Thank you.
So that speech from the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is just some 15 minutes away, and we will bring it you here on GB News.
Should we finish with a bit of cap doffing to the Ryder Cup team after that dramatic final day against the US? Aidan is with us, and when I say cap doffing, it's a bit of a sort of political issue as much as sport. What on earth has been going on in Rome,
well,
away from the fairways?
Well, it was reported on Saturday, I think it was, by a reporter that one of the players, Patrick Cantlay, quite a key player in the Team USA side, had refused to wear a cap because he was angry that Ryder Cup players weren't being paid. Now, Ryder Cup players have never been paid, so it seems a bit unlikely that would happen. Having said that, we have seen players before in the past not really be keen on Ryder Cup stuff because it's team stuff. Golf is very much a lonely, solitary, isolated existence. But yeah, he gets onto the course and he takes his shot, and then I think it was 3 cheers for his bank account or something like that. That was what the European crowd was singing, and it was a raucous crowd, it really was. That's why the home team generally wins these events. And so he takes his shot, he sinks a 43-footer, and then Rory McIlroy steps up to try and match it, to try and get edge ahead, and his caddy, John LeCarver,
walks across his
path, and it angered Rory McIlroy. That was the key thing here. And I said on this show yesterday, or sorry, not this show, but about 24 hours ago, I said that could tip the direction towards the USA. I got that wrong because Rory McIlroy made clear afterwards that round in the car park with the caddy and with Cantlay himself fired him up, riled him up. He went on to get 4 points, and he did as much as anybody else to regain the...
What on earth is going on in this genteel game? We saw it 2 years ago in the States, all this bad behaviour and bad feeling and the crowd getting riled up. I mean,
it's not a new thing. I mean, we think back to 1999, the late Payne Stewart. In fact, he died in an accident for some months just shortly after.
The plane crash?
It was, yeah, indeed. It was very, very sad, but he was one of the protagonists that day. Tiger Woods kind of... Again, we mentioned Tiger Woods. He was one of those ones who didn't go in for all this adversarial stuff within the sport, and that's why he kind of likes to keep himself to himself. But no, it's not a new thing rowing on the golf course. I'm sure lots of members around the country would pay testimony to that as well.
Another great victory for Luke Donald. Captain.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, is he likely to stay on? There seems to be a lot of...
I think he would. I mean, he was interesting because I think when I was doing a little bit of golf, maybe that 2010, 11, 12, he was imperious at the top of the order of merit. But he was one of those players, a bit like Lee Westwood, his compatriot. He was the world #1, but never actually won a major. I wonder whether the Ryder Cup, and he was very successful as a player with Ryder Cup as well, I wonder if the Ryder Cup just allows him to...
a different dynamic.
It's a different dynamic to populate his trophy cabinet a bit more. We all know he made plenty of money, but I could see him staying, I mean, he's been lauded. I mean, don't forget, there has to be context here as well. 2 years ago in Whistling Straits, Europe were absolutely obliterated by Team USA. Team USA, to me, they could have had a couple of players in who were playing well, but they decided not to include them. But if you look at the Ashes as well in the summer, same thing, 2 years ago, obliterated by Australia. It's difficult to turn things around in a relatively short period of time, but the home advantage makes a big difference. That's 30 years now that Team USA have failed to win in Europe.
Yeah, but certainly he's cool, calm and collected at the head of that team, isn't he? So two years maybe, and who knows what will happen next time round. VAR, which we thought was going to answer all problems, and here we are back at square one. What on earth is going on with it?
Square one. I mean, I said to someone I was having a phone call with somebody this morning, and they said to me, VAR is no different in year 5 to how it is in the first 3 months of its inception back in 2019. And Pip, this wasn't something we hit upon quickly and decided let's implement it next week. It was discussed for years. There's no new technology. I've been to VAR. I've been to Stockley Park. I've been shown how to use the equipment. It's not new equipment. Excuse me. It's just video and editing stuff that we could have done 50 odd years ago. It depends on human error. On human interpretation, getting things right. So all we did on Saturday was transferred a huge mistake from the pitch, from the field of play, to the VAR hub a few miles away over in Stockley Park, and still the error was made. We need to be realistic in our expectations. We have to understand that when human beings are in charge, you're going to get mistakes. And, of course, down in England tonight, it's been taken off the Fulham game.
Should there be a dedicated panel of VAR specialists? That's what's being suggested now.
Well, possibly. I mean, we saw it in the World Cup. There was a panel, but there's more. I sometimes think there's more people in there because in these VAR hubs, you're talking 3 people. If you put 10 people in there, it's more scope for disagreement.
Don't you need a referee who's been in the games to give it context?
No, you get that.
It's not just the sort of picture that you're seeing.
You get that already. Well, I'll tell you what I'd like to see. All those thousands of kids who are emptied out of academies every summer by football clubs, chewed up and spat out I'd rather see them being given a pathway to stay in football by retraining as referees. People who've played the game, people who've had impacts, they've suffered injuries, they've been in the maelstrom of attacking and defending, and they don't understand.
Well, because the current referees don't have the same mindset, you think?
I think playing the game makes a big difference.
Interesting.
When you've been in those tackles, you just have a little bit more understanding of the nuances around the game.
Could the Liverpool-Tottenham match be replayed in light of this?
Can't. I mean, I'd love the World Cup quarter-final from 1986 when Maradona handled the ball into the past Peter Shaw. I'd love that to be replayed, but you can't get into the realms of that. What needs to happen, Pip, and I can't believe it wasn't considered before, where it's clear and obvious, and it's clear as day that there's been a mistake made, there needs to be a 30-second break with protocol where someone says, listen, this is going to play out really badly tomorrow, we've made a really serious mistake here. And also, it was the timing of the goal, 34 minutes. Liverpool would have taken the lead. They could have gone top. Normally, if you take the lead in the Premier League, statistically, you're more likely to go on to win the game. So it was pivotal. Liverpool have lost the league twice out of the last 4 years, I think it is, by 1 point. And so that's how pivotal, that's how crucial these decisions can be.
Aidan, great to have you in again. Thanks very much indeed. Coming up, a few things happening in Manchester. Yes, we'll be back to the Tory party conference. A certain Jeremy Hunt speaking. All the latest live.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Something of a north-south split with the weather today, and then the potential for some pretty heavy rain over parts of central and eastern England tonight. There's 2 areas of low pressure. This one moving up from the south is bringing some quite warm air, but it's also bringing a lot of clouds and a damp and drizzly feel across southwest England, much of North Wales. Slight rain and drizzle on and off here, pushing into northwest England too. Something a bit brighter over parts of eastern England, and some good spells of sunshine for Scotland and Northern Ireland, although plenty of showers also coming in on a brisk wind across the Highlands and the Western Isles. Temperatures here in the mid-teens. Further south, with a bit of brightness, we could easily creep into the 20s. But then later on, the rain is likely to turn heavier over the Midlands, particularly the East Midlands, through parts of Lincolnshire during the evening, and especially for parts of Norfolk. We could catch some thunderstorms that could drop a lot of rain in a short space of time before that all tends to clear away overnight. Temperatures holding up in the south, quite a warm night here, something a little cooler further north, but still most towns and cities in double digits. On to Tuesday, and we still start off with a lot of cloud over East Anglia and the southeast. A little bit of rain here early on too, but that should clear away. Then skies brighten. Most places will see a mixture of sunshine and showers on Tuesday, with most of the showers across northern England and Scotland, and a largely dry afternoon further south. A bit breezy, but temperatures in the sunshine again in the southeast over 20 degrees.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the live desk here on GB News with, of course, the Tory party conference underway in Manchester and reports from Manchester that indeed the HS2 leg from Birmingham to Manchester has been scrapped. Of course, there's been much conjecture in recent weeks. We had 2 former Prime Ministers, 3 former Chancellors and a former Transport Secretary all saying that to scale that scheme back was completely wrong. But we understand the decision has been made, with Rishi Sunak saying that the billions involved should instead be spent on other transport infrastructure in the north of England.
Well, we can talk to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who is at the Tory party conference. We understand we will be speaking to her shortly, but let's try economics editor Liam Halligan. Liam, what are you hearing on the ground? Is this confirmed? The Manchester leg of HS2 is no more.
It's too quiet.
I think it's been pretty inevitable that that decision would be made for some months now. Of course, it's embarrassing for the Conservatives. But on the other hand, you've got lots of activists here who are baying for tax cuts soon. I've just come from the fringe meeting with Liz Truss, former Prime Minister, of course. She was joined by 3 other former cabinet ministers, including Jacob Rees-Mogg and Priti Patel, and they were basically saying to their Chancellor, cut taxes now if you want to win the election. Let's get growth going. We need to grow the pie in order that more wealth can trickle down to ordinary households. It's controversial that Liz Truss is here. It's controversial that she held a fringe meeting just an hour before Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is due to stand up. A fringe meeting that completely contradicted the Chancellor's message. She also disclosed to a packed house, it was standing room only, all the media were there, she disclosed that there are now 60 members on the Conservative backbenchers in her Conservative growth group. And that is the same size as the government's working majority. So if all these Tory MPs refuse to back any legislation after the autumn statement or next spring's budget that increases taxes, and that's what they're saying they're going to do, it's going to be very difficult for the government to get its budget through the House of Commons, and then we are in very serious political territory.
Well, we're already in serious political territory, of course, over HS2, bearing in mind we had, 2 former Prime Ministers, 3 former Chancellors, a former Transport Secretary, all saying if this was axed, then that was really going to hit the whole question of levelling up and the whole issue of the north of England being brought into that northern powerhouse. Jeremy Hunt was earlier saying that they were looking into why it was so expensive, why it faced so many issues, but is it him or Rishi Sunak that made the decision, do we think?
I don't think any decision like this would have been made without both of them being on side. Jeremy Hunt told GB News this morning that he's seen figures which show that high-speed rail lines in the UK cost 10 times more to build than they do in France. which is, of course, eye-watering. HS2 was originally estimated to cost £31 billion when it was first mooted in 2009, and that included the legs from London to Birmingham, Birmingham to Manchester, and also Birmingham to Leeds. The estimated bill now is upwards of £100 billion, and the problem that I have with this, as an economist, as an analyst, is if you just do HS2 from London to Birmingham, well, we've already got two perfectly good train lines from London to Birmingham, going out of Euston to New Street, of course, and going from Marylebone to Snow Hill on the Chiltern line. To do another train leg from London to Birmingham and to spend tens of billions of pounds on it, the cost-benefit analysis on that, the return on that taxpayer's cash, is clearly going to be negative in economic terms. So if we end up only with London to Birmingham, HS2 is going to be, I'm afraid, widely seen as a vanity project, as a white elephant.
Yeah, but we've got, of course, the IFS saying if you've spent the money on that section, then it makes sense to go further and do the whole kit and caboodle.
That's true, but that's more tens of billions of pounds, Mark, at a time when the government is already taxing the economy at a higher rate than we have in 70 years. Tax now accounts for approaching 38% of our annual national income. Interest payments on the government's debt are the second biggest line on the government's balance sheet, second only to the NHS. We're on course to spend £110 billion on debt interest this year, which is dead money. You don't get any nurses or doctors or schools or hospitals for that debt interest. And I must say, even though this looks embarrassing to the outside world, to most Tory activists, they will be cock-a-hoop that HS2 has been curtailed. It's never been popular within the party. It was George Osborne's original project. Then, of course, Labour were very supportive with Transport Minister Andrew Adonis. A lot of people in the political and media class want HS2, but I'd say certainly among Tory activists, there'll be silent cheering going on that this runaway train of a project in terms of costs has finally been put out to pasture.
Liam, we are expecting the Chancellor to be speaking any moment now. He is just being introduced at the moment. What do you think is going to be the main content of his speech? It's going to be quite different to what Liz Truss was calling for, isn't it? Which was, well, a cut in corporation tax, for example.
It's going to be very different to what Liz Truss just said to a packed room supported by other former cabinet ministers. And that's the point. Liz Truss came here in order to put clear blue water between her and her supporters and Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak. I don't think for a minute, having chaired her fringe meeting and obviously talked to her over many weeks in detail about what she was going to say, I don't think she's looking to become Prime Minister again, but she is looking to anoint the post-Sunak Tory leader and possibly the next Tory Prime Minister after a Labour government, if indeed Labour win that next election. There's a really active debate going on in the Conservative Party, of course. Much of the media will say it's splits, it's gaffes, it's chaos. A lot of activists will say, actually, no, this is democracy. This is our internal party democracy at a time when the public is watching. And a lot of the public, it seems, from opinion polls, they also think taxes are too high. Jeremy Hunt, in contrast, will be stressing steady as she goes, we are the grown-ups. He may go as far as outlining the case for lower taxes, saying that he wants lower taxes, but there's almost no way he's going to announce that today, because they'll want to keep that tax cut. They want to make it as dramatic as possible when they finally unveil that clear blue water. They want to do that as near to the next election as they possibly can, which probably doesn't mean the autumn statement in November. It probably means the budget next spring.
And just to return to what you were indicating about those followers of Liz Truss and perhaps Jake Berry as well, I mean, are there indications that people will vote against that autumn statement, the November statement, if they think he's not gone far enough, or if indeed inflation starts to tick up again?
Mark, this is the realms of speculation, but politics is all about seeing round corners, isn't it? And it strikes me that now Liz Truss has got 60 Tory backbenchers in her Conservative growth group on the backbenches of the House of Commons, and given that the government's working majority is around 60 as well, if Jeremy Hunt comes up with an autumn statement which puts taxes up as a percentage of GDP, a high share of those Conservative growth group MPs are committed to not voting for the government's legislation, and for a sitting government to not be able to get what we call a confidence and supply arrangement through the House, supply meaning money, to not get a money bill through the House, is to be able to not be able to govern. That could end up in a no-confidence situation for the Sunak government. This is speculation. I'm just doing the parliamentary arithmetic and looking ahead.
Gosh, you're setting it all up quite dramatically, Liam. What we did hear from Jeremy Hunt earlier was that the economy has started to turn the corner, but he stresses that there are no shortcuts to faster growth, and that will be something that he'll be talking about more very shortly.
Indeed, all the parties, they're talking about keeping taxes where they are or lower taxes. Even the Liberal Democrats at their party conference last weekend, they got rid of a totemic Lib Dem policy. It's been their policy for 30 years. We're going to put a penny on income tax to pay for better public services. Even Sir Ed Davey, who leads the Lib Dems, who I know is wedded to that policy, they junked that policy. They shelved that policy for now because they know out there among ordinary men and women, households and firms, there's a sense that taxation is too high. So Jeremy Hunt, Rishi Sunak, they know where their bread is buttered. They know they need to deliver lower taxes before an election, but I don't think they're going to do it now. What they're going to be doing now is talking about steady as she goes, getting inflation down. They'll be saying the best way to lower taxes is to lower inflation, because inflation is a tax on savings. Inflation erodes purchasing power of hard-working households and undermines living standards. And they'll be talking about getting interest rates down, returning to, if you like, pre-Truss world. Jeremy Hunt has got absolutely no problem blaming the current situation in the party and the country and the economy on his predecessor, Kwasi Kwarteng, and indeed on Liz Truss herself. He said to GB News this morning, I inherited quite a mess, and he was talking directly about Liz Truss. So you've now got these two factions of the party absolutely at each other's throats on tax. But for me, it's not really a philosophical difference, it's a difference of timing and strategy and tactics. Unless there's a major economic downturn and a major spike in government spending, a major energy crisis, I would expect the Conservatives to announce tax cuts before the election, but I wouldn't expect them to do it today.
We've got the video playing. We're expecting him on stage imminently. One of the problems he's indicated this morning is that government debt interests are so high, and that's why he's not got headroom or wriggle room. Jeremy Hunt just coming to the stage now, Liam. We're just going to interrupt. He's just waving at the crowd, and he's got a thick sheaf of paper there in his hand. Let's hear what he's got to say.
Good afternoon. The last time I spoke at conference was as Foreign Secretary 5 years ago. After that, I thought my time in government was over. So it's great to see the PM getting the over 50s back into meaningful work. I do, however, have some very youthful under 50s in my ministerial team. So thank you, John Glenn, Andrew Griffith, Vicky Atkins, Gareth Davis, Jojo Penn, Mark Fletcher, Paul Howell, Anthony Mangle and Andrew Stevenson for their brilliant work. And it's great to be in Manchester. Since 2010, this great region has seen unemployment halve, nearly 200,000 more jobs, and 6 new tech unicorns. Labour mayors talk up the problems, but it's Conservatives who chalk up the jobs. Now, our friends at the Office for National Statistics have recently changed their mind about the size of the British economy. They had been saying we were the worst performing large European economy since the pandemic. But we weren't the worst, we were one of the best. Since the pandemic, we've recovered better than France or Germany. We've grown faster than both of them since we left the single market. And since 2010, we've grown faster than France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Austria, Finland, the Netherlands, and Japan. So to all the pessimists and declinists who've been talking us down, we say this: don't bet against Britain. It's been tried before and it never works. Conference, it's nice to set the record straight, but Rishi Sunak and I care more about the future than the past. And our plan's very simple. We're going to make Britain a global leader in the industries of the future, the world's next Silicon Valley. And it's already happening. Last year, we became only the third trillion-dollar tech economy in the world. Our tech sector is now double the size of Germany's and 3 times France. British discovered vaccines and treatments saved 7 million lives across the world in the pandemic, more than from any other country. We do more offshore wind than anywhere in Europe. We've got 3 huge electric car factories being built. We're Europe's biggest film and TV production centre. And next time I want to see Barbie wearing a Union Jack, because that too was filmed in Britain. My Mansion House reforms are part of that, because they'll help fast-growing companies source billions of pounds of extra capital. We don't just want them to start here, we want them to stay here, because as we become a science superpower, there's nowhere better to be. All this happens not from quick fixes, but from long-term decisions, which is what you get with Rishi Sunak. We Conservatives know if you get the economy right, everything else comes right too. So right now, we're focused on bringing down inflation. Nothing hurts families more when it comes to the weekly shop, heating bills or pump prices, which is why the Prime Minister's pledged to halve it. And we're getting there. It was 11%, it's now down by 40%. The plan is working, and now we must see it through, just as Margaret Thatcher did many years ago. Conference, when we halve inflation, that's not a 1% income tax cut. It's a 5% boost to incomes compared to if it stayed the same. But just as we're succeeding, what's Labour planning? Some £28 billion a year of new borrowing. The Institute for Fiscal Studies say borrowing on that scale risks fueling inflation and keeping interest rates higher. Labour can change the fiscal rules, they can dress it up as responsible, but if they increase borrowing, they increase debt, and that means higher taxes, higher mortgages, and higher inflation for families. That's not an economic policy, it's an economic illusion. And it underlines the elemental choice in British politics, the choice behind all other choices. Sound money under the Conservatives or run out of money under Labour. Never again, Conference, never again. Conservatives will always protect public services, but we're also honest about the taxes that pay for them. After a once-in-a-century pandemic and the biggest energy crisis in a generation, the level of tax is too high. We were right to protect jobs and families, and thanks to Rishi's furlough scheme, we recovered faster from the pandemic than others. But with an ageing population and a war in Europe, public spending is still growing faster than the economy. Now, some say that's inevitable. The Institute for Fiscal Studies said last week it's likely to be what they said was a decisive and permanent shift to a higher tax economy. Conference, they're wrong. We need a more productive state, not a bigger state. If we increase public sector productivity growth by just 0.5%, we can stabilise public spending as a proportion of GDP. Increase it by more and we can bring the tax burden down. 0.5%. Now, for those of us with private sector backgrounds, that doesn't seem too much, does it? In the public sector, I'm telling you, it's harder. But we are up for the challenge. So I've commissioned my deputy, John Glenn, to restart the process of public service reform. John wants to know why teachers say that more than half their time is spent not actually teaching. Why police officers complain they spend longer filling out forms than catching criminals. Why doctors and nurses say they spend up to half their time, not with patients, but on admin. Of course, we need modern working practices and better IT. But the Treasury too needs to change its focus from short-term cost control to long-term cost reduction. And we're going to start with the civil service. We have the best civil servants in the world, and they saved many lives in the pandemic by working night and day. But even after that pandemic's over, we still have 66,000 more civil servants than before. New policies should not always mean new people. So today I'm freezing the expansion of the civil service and putting in place a plan to reduce its numbers to pre-pandemic levels. This will save £1 billion next year. And I won't lift that freeze until we have a proper plan, not just for the civil service, but for all public sector productivity improvements. That means, amongst other things, changing our approach to equality and diversity initiatives. Smashing glass ceilings is everyone's job, not a box to be ticked by hiring a diversity manager. But I'm going to surprise you with one equality and diversity initiative of my own. And trust me, you'll like this one. Nobody should have their bank account closed because somebody else decides they're not politically correct. We'll tighten the law to stop people being debanked for the wrong political views. The Lib Dems are wrong to want to overturn a democratic Brexit vote, but they still need a cash point to withdraw their euros. The SNP are wrong to ignore a democratic vote for the union, but they still need a bank account to pay for their motorhomes. And even Keir Starmer, who's wrong on just about everything, needs his trade union cash so he too can have a bank account, just never the keys to Downing Street. There's somewhere else where we need to rethink the way the state works, our welfare system. I'm proud to live in a country where, as Churchill said, there's a ladder everyone can climb, but also a safety net below which no one falls. That safety net is paid from tax. And that social contract depends on fairness to those in work alongside compassion to those who aren't. And that means work must pay. We're making sure it does. From last year, for the first time ever, you can earn £1,000 a month without paying a penny of tax or national insurance. But despite that, even when companies are struggling to find workers, around 100,000 people are leaving the labour market every year for a life on benefits. Mel Stride gets this 100%, which is why he's replacing the work capability assessment. And we're going to look at the way the sanctions regime works. It isn't fair that someone who refuses to look seriously for a job gets the same as someone trying their best. Now, Labour have pledged to end sanctions. Have they learned nothing? When they left office, we had more children in workless households than nearly anywhere in Europe. Since then, those households are down by 1 million, and confidence we are never, ever going back. So to make sure work continues to pay, today I take a step forwards towards completing another great Conservative reform, the National Living Wage. Since we introduced it, nearly 2 million people have been lifted from absolute poverty after housing costs, not by tax credits or benefits, but by removing the barriers to work, boosting salaries, cutting tax, making work pay. We promised in our manifesto to raise the national living wage to 2/3 of median income, ending low pay in this country. At the moment, it's £10.42 an hour, and we're waiting for the Low Pay Commission to tell us next year's recommendation. But I confirm today, whatever that recommendation, we'll increase the national living wage to at least £11 an hour next year. That's a pay rise for 2 million workers, and the wages of the lowest paid over £9,000 higher than they were in 2010. Because if you work hard, a Conservative government will always have your back. It's easy to support higher growth, better public services and lower taxes. Harder to make it happen. In Britain today, there's only one party prepared to make those difficult decisions. Our party and our Prime Minister, whose diligence and tenacity have given us the Windsor Framework, the Atlantic Declaration, the Trans-Pacific Trade Deal and the NHS Workforce Plan, whose own life story shows just what's possible with education, aspiration and hard work. His story and our story. More growth, more jobs, more doctors, more nurses, better schools, less poverty, less crime. Conference, it's time to roll up our sleeves, take on the declinists and watch the British economy prove the doubters wrong. Thank you.
Hunt in that keynote speech, and let's reflect that the biggest cheer appeared to come when he talked about public service reform in detail, freezing expansion of the civil service and reducing its size, bringing a cheer and a round of applause, but no mention of HS2 and what's going to happen or not happen about that Manchester leg.
We are hearing, despite Jeremy Hunt not mentioning it, that the HS2 Manchester leg is scrapped. That is what we have heard in the last hour. We will be getting more reaction to that. Jeremy Hunt, though, what he did say was that the national living wage is going to be increased to £11 an hour. He told Conference that if you work hard, a Conservative government will always have your back. He also talked about people being debanked. Somebody who is at the conference today, Nigel Farage, will have been listening to that closely because he was debanked by Coots. Well, Jeremy Hunt says nobody should have their bank account closed because someone decides they are not politically correct. We will tighten the law to stop people being debanked for their political views.
But of course, many of the journalists there will now be wanting to know what is going to happen as we get the conference continuing. What is the status of HS2? I think we can speak to both Liam and Catherine Forster, who has been monitoring these events. No mention of it there in that keynote speech. But Catherine, just to come in on what he'd said earlier, Jeremy Hunt indicated they were looking into HS2 as why it was so expensive and why it had failed on so many issues. Clearly, the indication was there that this might have been a decision that was coming.
Yes, a couple of weeks ago, Jeremy Hunt said that the costs had spiralled completely out of control, and it's been widely trailed that the government were likely to scrap the northern branch from Birmingham through to Manchester. Now, in the last hour, I've had it confirmed by an impeccable source that Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, understands that that part of the line is indeed being axed, and the expectation is that the Prime Minister will announce this in his speech on Wednesday. Now, of course, we've been hearing a lot about this for a couple of weeks. This is really the last place the Conservatives would want to have their party conference, in Manchester, when they make this announcement. Indeed, the conference centre is an old train station we're sitting in right now, so some irony there. Also, the fact, of course, that people couldn't get to the conference by train because of the strikes, and they won't be able to get back because of the strikes. So it does seem the decision has been taken. An announcement is coming on Wednesday. We understand that what is going to happen, they will try to soften this blow because there's been huge opposition to the scrapping of HS2. They will try to soften this blow by saying they're repurposing the money to other transport projects in the north of England. Some talk of repairing the road network, potholes, etc. We know that in the last couple of days the Conservatives have decided to be the motorist's best friend, but also repurposing that money for Northern Powerhouse Rail. Now, if it happens, I think it's worth saying we've been hearing about an east-west connection for many, many, many years. George Osborne, the former Chancellor, was somebody who championed this. We've heard lots of talk of high-speed lines connecting Liverpool to Manchester to Leeds to Hull to Newcastle, and yet nothing has actually been delivered. So will it happen? And even if it does, what will the timescale be? We've had Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, saying that he's been completely closed out of the process, and also saying that that northern connection to Manchester is integral to the plans for Northern Powerhouse Rail. So I expect there will be an almighty row about this.
OK, Catherine, thank you for that. Well, let's talk to our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, you were listening very closely there to what the Chancellor had to say. HS2 not mentioned at all, as we expected. There was plenty of other things that he did say, all of them predictable as far as you're concerned?
Quite predictable, yeah, widely trailed. Of course, the minimum wage is going up. The government doesn't pay for that. Business pays for that, though government claims the credits. It wasn't too long ago that Conservative Party conferences were telling their delegates that if you have a minimum wage, it will cost jobs. So the Conservatives have certainly changed their tune on that. He's freezing the expansion of the civil service, which will go down well in these parts. And as we predicted, as we've been saying all day, Mark and Pip, he made the case for tax cuts without actually outlining tax cuts. Yeah. He didn't talk about Liz Truss directly, though of course many of the delegates watching him will have been at that fringe meeting, a packed house fringe meeting, just the hour before the Chancellor spoke. And on HS2, it doesn't really surprise me. HS2 has never really been that popular among the Conservative Party faithful. It isn't really that popular among the general public. It's popular among an extremely powerful engineering lobby, and it's popular among lots of business interests who have bought land up and down the line and want to benefit from the speculative increases in the price of that land. Many people within the rail industry don't like HS2 because they think it costs too much money for the return you get on that money. But look, this is a huge embarrassment for the country. We've had this high-speed rail project first proposed in 2009. It looks as if we're only going to end up with London to Birmingham, not Birmingham to Manchester, as Catherine was just saying there, or even Birmingham to Leeds. That branch of it was scrapped in 2021. And unless you have those links from Birmingham to Manchester and to Leeds, the economics of the project, what we call the cost-benefit analysis, the bang you get for your taxpayer buck, doesn't really add up. We already have 2 train lines from London to Birmingham, and they're not bad. Does it really matter to take 20 minutes off the journey when there's decent Wi-Fi on trains these days, or at least there should be, and you can work on those trains? It strikes me that this will go down as another example of the UK not being able to really get its arms around big infrastructure projects in a mature and coherent way. But be in no doubt, there will be a lot of Conservative activists who cheer inwardly or even outwardly when Rishi Sunak scraps London to Manchester. They'll take the embarrassment, which Catherine rightly mentioned, that they are in Manchester. The conference is in a former railway terminus. They'll take that on the chin, particularly if scrapping HS2, freeing up those tens of billions of pounds that have already been spent earmarked for the Birmingham to Manchester route, a route that we've already spent £2 to £3 billion on, by the way. We spent about £30 billion on London to Birmingham so far. If that frees up money for tax cuts going forward, then I think the Conservatives will think that it's a good job and they'll take the criticism as it comes.
That will not be shared, however, by a certain Lord Heseltine, George Osborne, Patrick McLaughlin, former Transport Secretary. So let's get back to Catherine to find out a bit more, because clearly it's across the political divide. Andy Burnham, who spoke to Chris Hope as well, indicating that this would be, I think, vandalism, economic vandalism was one of the phrases used. What do we know about the offer to sweeten this in terms of a TransPennine or other details?
Well, we know that apparently money is going to roads. This is a bit of a departure, isn't it? Because the government have found a newfound love of motorists and supporting drivers. We heard about it on Saturday when Rishi Sunak said he's sick of the war against the motorists. We heard a lot from Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, this morning. But more broadly, and I think more importantly, Northern Powerhouse Rail. Now, it's said that the money will be repurposed, but what we don't know is how much money will be repurposed and what exactly the North is going to end up with and when, because these things take many, many years. We know that HS2 first conceived 2008, 2009. None of it's opened. Most of it's been cut. It was originally a Y shape. Both the Y parts have been cut. Even the bit at the bottom is likely to stop at Old Oak Common. So the 16 million people live in the north of England, and frankly I think there will be a lot of scepticism because they have heard it all before of fast trains. I mean, to give you an example, the journey times between Leeds and Manchester have barely changed in decades, and you know, the transport problems in the north are huge. We have a massive productivity problem in this country. We have great northern cities that are not geographically far apart, and if they were linked up by good fast trains, imagine
Catherine,
the potential that there would be.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask you very quickly, you indicated that this was from a source close to Michael Gove. What is Michael Gove likely to do now, bearing in mind his remit as levelling up originally?
Well, Michael Gove was said privately to be not very happy about this. It was also said that privately the Transport Secretary was not very happy about this. But ultimately, I think the decision has been taken by the Prime Minister and I suspect the Treasury, because in the end it's all about the money, and they've decided that it's out of control. The money would be better used elsewhere. But I think it will be an international embarrassment. I mean, look at the high-speed trains that they've had for decades in France, TGV, etc. Just across the channel, they managed to build these trains, these networks. Why can't we do it here in the UK?
We'll let that question hang in the air at that former railway station in Manchester. Liam and Catherine, for a moment, thank you. More as we get it, but let's get an update on the headlines with Ray.
Thanks, Mark. It's 33 minutes past 2, our top stories this hour. A government source has told GB News that no decisions have been taken on HS2 following reports that the Manchester leg has been axed. As we've just been hearing, there's much speculation about the rail project's future. It comes after a number of government ministers called for the project to be reviewed due to spiralling costs. The Chancellor says it shouldn't cost 10 times more to build a railway in the UK than just across the Channel in France. Well, Donald Trump is arriving at a court in New York where he's due to stand trial in a civil fraud case. Now, we should be seeing, for those of you watching on television, pictures coming to us live from Manhattan. The former US president is accused of inflating the value of his assets by billions of dollars to secure better loan and insurance terms. Now, this comes a week after the judge found Mr. Trump liable for fraud and will largely concern the penalties that he must face. The prosecutor is seeking $250 million in fines and a permanent ban against Trump from running businesses in New York. And we can see there a crowd of reporters waiting to receive him. Well, a second police force is reportedly investigating allegations against the comedian Russell Brand. In a statement, Thames Valley Police said it's received new information relating to harassment and stalking allegations dating back to 2018. They added that it would be inappropriate to comment on an ongoing investigation. It follows a joint investigation by the Sunday Times and Channel 4. Russell Brand denies all accusations of criminality. Liz Truss has called on the Chancellor to cut corporation tax back to 19% in his next autumn statement. Speaking at a fringe rally event, the former PM urged the Tory leadership to axe the tax, cut bills and build homes. Ms Truss said businesses are now choosing not to locate in the UK and they shouldn't be treated like a cash cow to be milked. Well, junior doctors and consultants in England have started a 3-day walkout. Until Thursday at 7 a.m, they'll deliver what's being described as Christmas Day levels of staffing. Their last joint strike in September led to almost 130,000 appointments being rescheduled. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the live desk. Plenty of drama in Manchester. Plenty of drama due to a take-off in New York. A certain Donald Trump, of course, due to stand trial there in a civil fraud case. He arrived very early, and that is within the court precinct building, where you can see the cameras and security awaiting for the former president to face these civil cases in terms of this particular hearing in front of Judge Arthur Engoron, a man who Mr. Trump has called deranged.
It's not just the former US president either, it's also his 2 adult sons and the Trump Organization accused of inflating the value of their properties by more than $2 billion.
Yeah, in terms of this particular case with the New York Attorney General in this Manhattan court, Letitia James setting out a case for $250 million in fines for the Trump Organization as a whole, but then a ban on Donald Trump running any businesses in the state. And, of course, it is his effective power base, given Trump Tower and the other things such as golf courses he's got in New York State and so on. Just to reiterate, he faces 91 criminal charges in 4 other cases, denying any wrongdoing, and says this all amounts to a witch hunt to prevent him returning to the White House with, of course, the 2024 presidential race.
This case is what's called a bench trial, and that means that it will be decided not by a jury, but by Judge Engoron, and it could take as long as 3 months to hear the case. Donald Trump yesterday said that he would be present at the start of this trial today, says he's going there to fight for his name and reputation. He wrote on his Truth social platform that this whole case is a sham.
Judge Engoron, in opposition to that, has written in a ruling in court documents given in evidence that there are clearly fraudulent valuations, saying Trump and the company operated in a fantasy world, ignoring planning and rent restrictions and boosting property values. Trump accused of overstating his wealth by some $3.6 billion. That's why all those cameras are waiting. Back to New York as we get more.
Now, junior doctors and consultants have joined forces on picket lines right across the country today in what is their longest combined strike so far in their long-running dispute with the government over pay.
Well, last week, 27,000 staff absent from work due to this industrial action. Indeed, since the strikes have begun, NHS England showing that the total number of acute appointments rescheduled now exceeding 1 million.
Let's speak now to GB News reporter Jack Carson, who joins us from the Manchester Royal Infirmary. Jack, we just keep going round and round in circles, don't we, with these NHS strikes?
Yeah, well, that's what it feels like, doesn't it? Because, of course, the government refusing to come back to the table because, of course, they say they accepted those recommendations of the independent pay review body. The BMA, of course, say that those recommendations, firstly, a lot of the doctors actually today contesting whether the independent pay review body actually is independent to me, and also, obviously, saying that those levels of pay are not, of course, what they want. Senior consultants looking for anywhere in the region of a 12% pay rise, of course, they say it has to be above inflation to, of course, take into consideration some of those losses. Junior doctors looking for full pay restoration back to levels not seen for, of course, for about 15 years to take into consideration all the losses. They say around a 35% pay rise would be good enough for them. But, of course, the government, without those negotiations, it's unclear whether the BMA will come off the picket lines anytime soon. Tomorrow here in Manchester, we're going to get a huge national rally right outside the Tory party conference with the BMA bussing in people from around the country to show their physical show of support, of course, for the doctors' strikes. We know that the public support is still with them, and as well, of course, speaking to the doctors on the picket line today, they, of course, are determined to keep this strike going.
So I work as a consultant psychiatrist, and I can tell you that for the last 10 years, I don't think there has been a single period in which my hospital has not had to employ some temporary staff or some locum consultants. And that is because not only are we not training enough doctors, we are losing doctors. We are hemorrhaging talent to other places. And unless that happens, it means the quality of care can't be preserved. It means that patients can't get the standard of service that they rightly expect. And our medical schools that are training doctors will be training doctors that will go to other places. The message that we are saying is that we will continue to take the action we need to do until the government comes with us with a credible offer.
I'm prepared to keep striking until we see some negotiation. And that's the point. The government aren't coming to the table, and actually that's disingenuous to say it's an independent review body, because it's not independent at all. They've interfered with it. How can that possibly be independent? For me, the problem is that over the past 10 to 15 years, we've seen attrition of our pay when you take into account inflation. We haven't kept pay parity with other similar professions, and perhaps it's not so much maybe about people at my stage. I'm a consultant. I'm probably going to be working until I'm 60. I'm 54 now, so that's not too long to go. But it's really about the next generation. They're having it really, really tough. If people like me are dissatisfied and are burnt out because we are working longer and harder with fewer staff because they're leaving, there is going to be nobody to train the next generation of doctors. The next generation of doctors, they've got young families. They can't afford their mortgages. They're getting poached and headhunted overseas. We see this all the time. And the medical students that are coming through, they're coming to the point of graduation, and then many of them are making a decision to leave medicine. So there's a lot of attrition at that point. And I've got medical students who I look after who are actually in the middle of their studies, who are looking at what's happening financially and now making a decision about whether they're going to carry on with their studies or not. So we are not planning for the future. There is going to be no staffing in the NHS. There's going to be no NHS in the future if we don't fight for our pay.
Well, Jack, you were reminding us earlier that the two sides haven't spoken to each other for 100 days. And then we had Dr. Liam Fox, of course, he was a GP himself, speaking at the Tory party conference to us, saying, oh, it's not doctors on strike, it's the BMA that are on strike, indicating how far apart the two sides still are, maybe.
Yeah, I think that certainly is the case in some respects, but also speaking to the doctors on the picket line here today, it's not just the BMA. There are a lot of doctors which are unhappy with the way, of course, not only, of course, with their pay structures, but also, of course, as you mentioned, and as you heard those from those doctors there, it's all about, as well, the future of the NHS, and they don't currently feel that the current pay levels are creating a future for the NHS where it's sustainable.
Jack, outside Manchester Royal Infirmary, of course, not that far from that conference, indeed. Thanks for updating us there.
Peak ScotRail fares are being scrapped from today in a 6-month trial which aims to encourage more people to travel by train instead of by car.
Well, the project being funded by the Scottish Government to allow customers to travel all day on off-peak fares until the end of March 2024.
ScotRail have said the trial will see massive savings across the country. Well, let's go live to Glasgow and speak to GB News' Scotland reporter Tony Maguire. Tony, the flip side of this, I guess, is that the services are going to become extremely busy.
Yes, that's correct. And it's worth saying that ScotRail are prepared for an increased footfall. Of course, this is all in part to not just get people back to work, but Scotland's trains are only about 70% as full as they were before COVID. So that ScotRail this week, they had come out this morning, along with the Transport Secretary, to really promote this event. But the hope is, as we say, that more people will leave the cars parked in the driveway and opt to take the train for work. Of course, we still have quite a lot of remote and hybrid workers, so it will remain to be seen whether it's enough to bring them back up to those pre-pandemic levels. However, quite big savings right across the board. So from Perth to Dundee is around just short of £5 cheaper for a return, and then of course the Edinburgh to Glasgow line is around £14 cheaper. Now over the course of the month that really tots up to about £280, and then if you take that journey 5 days a week from now until the end of the trial, well, that's about £1,600 worth of savings. So it's fair to say that, especially in the heart of a cost of living crisis, going into the winter months where fuel bills we can expect to go up a good little bit, as they always do, it's certainly quite a lot of savings for the people now. ScotRail, as I mentioned, they're prepared for quite a large influx of commuters, or so they hope, and they've said that every single carriage available is going to be on the network, and some of the busier lines will have as many as 8 extra carriages tacked onto the end of the trains, just to allow for those really high commuter periods.
And Tony, can you just give us an indication, is this an experiment, or have they done the number crunching where they believe enough extra passengers can come on to actually make up for these savings?
I think it's probably down to a couple of things. One, that of course ScotRail has now been nationalised for the last 18 months, and I guess with other things going on in Scottish politics, now is the best time to look at a way to really capitalise that to the benefit of the Scottish population. The other side is that it builds in green credentials to get less cars on the road and to get more people onto the trains. So we know that this is just going to be 6 months. It's going to be from the start of October till the end of March, and I dare say that nothing like this has really been done anywhere in the UK before, so it'll be really interesting to see whether those numbers can take this from being an experiment to a new benefit of the nationalised rail service here in Scotland.
Tony, in Glasgow, thank you very much indeed for updating us. We'll let you go and get your cheap ticket to wherever you want to get to. Thanks very much indeed.
Now, we're into October now, but you might be interested to hear that last month the UK had its joint warmest September on record. The UK's mean temperature last month was 15.2 Celsius, which puts it level with 2006's record figure. And it is being credited by the Met Office as due to the impact of climate change. There is some lovely pictures for you last month. And actually, the weather over the next few days, although it's not boiling hot, it is going to be looking very mild for the time of year.
Might not be that crowded. That looks like Brighton, I think. But clearly, people will enjoy an Indian summer, which we're told is actually October rather than September, technically. Anyway, things have been hotting up in Manchester, too. Let's return to the Tory party conference and bring in our political editor, Chris Hope. HS2, are we there? Are we in the sidings? Are we going round the turntable? Where are we on it, Chris?
It looks like, Mark, we're on the edge of what will be seen by many as a betrayal of the north of England. It looks like the government is about to announce that the link between Birmingham and Manchester is not going to go ahead. We've had this from sources. My colleague Catherine Forster broke on this channel a few moments ago about she's had sources close to a very senior cabinet minister saying he has been told that he's not going to go ahead. We've been told it could be announced in the Prime Minister's speech tomorrow here in Manchester. But the optics of this happens are dreadful. The official line from the government is that no decisions have been made. That often can be seen as code for they haven't yet announced it. Again, nothing confirmed. But if this goes ahead, Mark, you've got all this money being spent on tunnelling under the south of England between London and Birmingham. All the money is gone and they can't afford to link the north to Birmingham. It is almost a symbol of the failure for many of levelling up in this country.
Yeah, and we understand Michael Gove may be the person who's let the cat out of the bag early before the Prime Minister announces it. Do we know anything then about the bottom end, where we were told about Old Oak Common might be the end of the line rather than Euston?
We still don't know. We know work is paused in Euston, so instead this line will start 5 miles out at Old Oak Common and then go underground for most of it to Birmingham, and then that's HS2. That is not the HS2 that the Cameron government supported back in the day, that was supported again by Boris Johnson's government, Theresa May's, Liz Truss. This has always been a project, Mark and Pippa, that's been driven by political need. Less, the economics have been less clear. But I think the timing of this is dreadful. I'm talking to you, as you know, from Manchester. This now will not be connected. There may be some mitigations because there's parts of the HS2 link in the north which is required to link Hull to Manchester to Liverpool on this northern powerhouse rail. So the hope is there'll be those measures. But it seems right now that, as things stand, not confirmed yet, and again the government not commenting, but there's widespread reports here in Manchester that this is not going to go ahead. This link between Manchester and Birmingham.
Chris, thank you for updating us. And of course, your conversation earlier with Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, indicating they may be considering legal action if that decision was made. But we'll see what happens. For the moment, thanks for updating us with that breaking news.
There will be more from the Tory party conference at the top of the hour.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Something of a north-south split with the weather today, and then the potential for some pretty heavy rain over parts of central and eastern England tonight. There's two areas of low pressure. This one moving up from the south is bringing some quite warm air, but it's also bringing a lot of clouds and a damp and drizzly feel across southwest England, much of North Wales. Slight rain and drizzle on and off here, pushing into northwest England too. Something a bit brighter over parts of eastern England, and some good spells of sunshine for Scotland and Northern Ireland, although plenty of showers also coming in on a brisk wind across the Highlands and the Western Isles. Temperatures here in the mid-teens. Further south, with a bit of brightness, we could easily creep into the 20s. But then later on, the rain is likely to turn heavier over the Midlands, particularly the East Midlands, through parts of Lincolnshire during the evening, and especially for parts of Norfolk. We could catch some thunderstorms that could drop a lot of rain in a short space of time before that all tends to clear away overnight. Temperatures holding up in the south, quite a warm night here, something a little cooler further north, but still most towns and cities in double digits. On to Tuesday, and we still start off with a lot of cloud over East Anglia and the southeast. A little bit of rain here early on too, but that should clear away. Then skies brighten. Most places will see a mixture of sunshine and showers on Tuesday, with most of the showers across northern England and Scotland, and a largely dry afternoon further south. A bit breezy, but temperatures in the sunshine again in the southeast over 20 degrees.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.